Good morning, good afternoon for those that may be in different time zones. Welcome to the AHERI Virtual Conference 2020. This conference was slated for March this year, but due to the challenges posed by COVID-19, it was postponed, and eventually we have hosted it as a virtual conference. And I want to welcome everyone this morning to this event, even as we start off. So before we jump into the formal session, I would just like to give a quick rundown of what you should expect this morning and today. We have the introduction and formal opening session, and shortly we will be hearing welcome remarks from the conference convener, who is also our Institute Director, Mr. Robert Owino. After him, we will have some remarks from our keynote speaker, Professor Chacha Nyaigoti Chacha, who is already connected to the call. Welcome, Professor. We'll thereafter have a presentation from Sarah Kiden, who is a Marie Curie Research Fellow from Northumbria University. Sarah is already on the call as well. She's going to make a presentation on digital literacy, infrastructure development, and access. After that, we will have a panel discussion followed by a question and answer session. This panel will look into the impact, response, opportunities, and challenges facing innovation in higher education, taking into consideration the context of digital literacy, infrastructure development, and access. To wind up, that will wind up the morning session. In the afternoon, we have another session where we will have a presentation from Professor Joseph Knoll from the Basic Internet Foundation at the University of Oslo. He'll be speaking about digital infrastructures and education. It will be followed by a panel discussion and a question and answer session as well. The panel discussion will focus on the relevant policy interventions which are necessary to support the uptake of innovation in higher education. We have a great panel of speakers composed of Nodumo Lamini from the Association of African Universities, Michael Rasugu, Fadahunsi Sefulmi from the Oracle Academy. And to wrap up the day, we will have Gordon Obonyo, an AHERI associate, giving us a recap of what will have been discussed throughout the day. So that in brief is what we should expect this day. I want to request that even as the conference proceeds, you can tweet. We have a technical team that will be sharing with us in the chat pod the hashtag for the meeting. Keep tweeting and retweeting so that many more can follow this conversation. Share your comments on Facebook as well so that we can have as much traction from the African continent. I can see many more speakers or many more participants joining, and I want to welcome each and everyone before we proceed. Some housekeeping duties. If you are not speaking, make sure that you are muted. Again, it might not be necessary for you to turn on your video to conserve the bandwidth, but I expect the panelists and the speakers to be using their videos. So without further ado, I want to take this opportunity to invite the welcome remarks from our conference convener, which shall be presented via video. Enjoy as we listen to the welcome remarks.
Our keynote speakers, presenters, and participants, greetings to you all and a warm welcome to the AHERI 2020 conference. The possibility to utter these words in context of the COVID-19 pandemic is a testament to the capabilities and commitment of humanity to adapt. This conference was slated for March, but we had to cancel upon proclamation of the pandemic. AHERI continues to be relevant and committed to creating solutions through collaboration of academia, industry, and government. AHERI's goal is to support sustainable and transformational development in Africa through higher education. The following are the key objectives of AHERI: to promote and support networking among higher education researchers in the region, implementation of research aimed at improving Africa higher education, promotion and support of publication and documentation on Africa higher education, and finally, lobbying and advocacy for the adoption of the research findings in decision-making within higher education. AHERI's rallying call, Ideas into Action, continues to guide us as we participate in this conference. From AHERI 2019 conference, a network of enthusiasts championing ICT in higher education followed through the idea of community networks as a tool for development. The team tapped the idea of community networks to action by deploying digital villages in 3 sites. The digital villages deployed through partnership with some of the participants have been subject of study in a number of international fora and continues to inspire upscaling. This year's AHERI conference theme of innovation in higher education is relevant in addressing traditional challenges facing education sector and the emerging concerns due to the pandemic. In our deliberations, we would like to view the disruptions to learning as opportunities to catalyze innovations and transformation of higher education in Africa. As we deliberate on innovations in higher education in our discussions, the following questions will guide us. How can we leverage technology in increasing access and quality of higher education? What skills and competences are needed to maximize impact of innovations? Do we have suitable and sufficient infrastructure to support innovations? Which statutes and laws govern innovations in higher education? Are there funding and investment opportunities? Will pedagogy and methodologies change to ensure business continuity? In the next 2 days, the presentations from keynote speakers, paper presentations, and panel discussions will be interactive and from diverse perspectives. To have the optimum virtual conference experience, kindly share your thoughts and questions on the chat platform. We look forward to identifying potential projects from the networks established in the conference for implementation. At the end of the conference, we shall share the proceedings, we shall cover the ideas that have been presented and identify potential projects that shall be initiated and presented in the next conference. I therefore take this opportunity to wish us all productive and stimulating discussions at AHERI 2020 conference.
Thank you very much. As you've heard, Africa Higher Education Research Institute is about translating ideas into action. At this juncture, I would like to invite Professor Chacha, Nyaigoti Chacha, to give his keynote remarks. Professor, you have the floor.
I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for allowing me to make some few remarks as an opening statement, which principally people call a keynote speak. So I'm speaking now on a number of issues, but focused specifically on AHERI's experience in ICT and its evolution. Universities and research institutes such as AHERI, Africa Higher Education Research Institute, through their research and training of technicians, are key players in developing the response to the crisis caused by the COVID-19. You know, we postponed this meeting because of this COVID-19, and we didn't know that COVID-19 will create challenges which will eventually make us believe and embrace the power of technology. For instance, the digital village launched by AHERI Community Networks highlighted the immense needs of underprivileged students in being equipped with the basic computer hardware and software tools essential for operationalization of the e-learning. I think what we need to focus on here is sometimes this COVID-19 has given us a big opportunity which we didn't know that it exists, that people can actually use the e-learning mode and reach out to very many people. But the challenges, as highlighted in this statement, which I have said, is how prepared are people all over who need to be reached to receive the information from those who are offering the e-learning courses. Through the digital villages, learners in remote areas are now able to improve their digital literacy skills, considering that teaching and learning have been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis in the most direct way. Such initiatives can be upscaled to mitigate the worsening concerns of learning inequality and the widening digital divide between the rich and the poor students in African continent. I think the rich are able to get access to facilities and equipment when the poor in the villages might be disadvantaged. A rapid assessment of the experiences of COVID-19 disruption to tertiary education at Omuga Technical and Vocational College exposed many significant challenges facing the tertiary education system and the institutions, including the demand for improved utilities and local infrastructure to support continued distance and blended learning models. In addition, preliminary lessons learned since starting its operations, the digital villages have revealed several local challenges that may be faced by universities while switching to the online mode of teaching and learning. These challenges majorly relate to the online infrastructure and digital competences. For example, the weakness of internet connection and internet speed in many countries, high prices for good internet connections, digital illiteracy among instructors and academics and learners, absence of computers, laptops, tablets, smartphones that support online teaching and learning. Many online instruments, platforms, and websites crashed when unexpectedly high number of clients connected to them, increasing need to uptake innovative solutions of technology at the university. I think I want to comment on some of these concerns which are emerging. I have had some universities, for example, where the senior professors are not able to use the gadgets such as the ones which we are using during this conference. And some leaders in universities have given them notice that unless they learn quickly how to adopt to the new technologies, it will be very difficult for them to be maintained and held as workers of the university. There is a need for a policy framework for funding and knowledge sharing. This can be achieved through establishment of an inclusive policy framework for funding to be implemented through public-private partnerships. I think the governments of Africa alone cannot succeed without involving the private sector practitioners and private sector funders. The current learning crisis has availed opportunities for improving the existing learning management systems in institutions through networking. Universities and research institutes should reach out to partners and collaborators to strengthen and establish the partnerships that can be developed to ensure that all people who are going to access education through this mode are able. More affluent and better prepared universities and technical companies in education, such as Microsoft, are encouraged to make their online resources available to universities and regions which are less well prepared. Such partnerships and networks should also receive dedicated support at the country and national level. I think this requires national policies and country policies so that individuals who are going to be supporting the learning mode through technology are supported also through policy framework, which is enshrined by the governments. Although these recommendations represent an immediate crisis response, such as partnerships might prove helpful and inspiring beyond the crisis, since the higher education landscape in Africa is largely underfunded and coupled with immense needs for students. The needs for students are really immense because the universities have been expanding and there are very many students now who are accessing education. But when the challenges of COVID-19 come to bear, you realize that most of these students were sent home and they are in their villages where the opportunities to access learning becomes very difficult. Partnership will guarantee equitable access and quality higher education for current and future generations. Within that framework, we need to discuss the issue and the question of quality assurance. Given the urgent need of higher education institutions to move forward to online teaching and learning, one of the main expected challenges for universities in Africa is the weakness of quality assurance systems of educational delivery. This issue is exacerbated by a general distrust in the quality of e-learning and remote learning, accompanied with the fact that the regulatory environment, especially in Kenya and Africa in general, is not yet sufficient aligned with the online learning. We at the Commission for University Education have invited universities to participate and make recommendations, and we have developed protocols on how to apply this mode of learning and teaching. But we are still concerned that the universities, many universities will not be able to match the expected requirements as far as the technology and the framework on which to base the e-learning is based. Because of the funding inequalities, some universities do not have adequate resources to be able to match the expected needs of those who will be learning through this mode. Higher education institutions should establish an institutional system of monitoring the online teaching. I think we need to train and support both teachers and students in technology, enhanced teaching and learning. The university staff, administrators, managers, they need training also to support for the institution's strategies for technology to enhance the teaching. so that it's not only lecturers who are expected to be in class who should embrace technology, but even the managers and administrators in the offices should embrace technology so that they can support those who are offering the e-learning teaching. Peer learning at county and the national level to speed up technology should be enhanced. It will enhance teaching and learning and establishing of national program and funding to promote student-centered and digital learning. It is important for us to appreciate the fact that at the end of the day, this COVID-19 has given us has become a wake-up call. We have realized that it is possible for one person to sit in a place and teach or reach out to many students. But I think the challenge that we are going to be facing is to ensure that each one of those students who are expected to be listening or to be getting the material that is provided through the e-learning is indeed getting it. And the challenges in the rural areas, for example, should be overemphasized in the sense that we know that electricity supply is not very assured to reach out to wherever the students would be hooking on in order to learn. So perhaps as we move forward, we need to appreciate the fact that the COVID-19 has come. It has opened our minds to think outside the box, because we were all confined to classroom environment where all students came on campus and we expected them to attend lectures. But I think this has allowed us to see that it is possible for one professor sitting in Kampala or Dar es Salaam to reach out to students all over Africa and be able to be heard by the students, and the students can respond. But in order for this to happen, we must strengthen our quality assurance systems, which will now have to deal with the new mode of learning, so that we assure every student, and we ensure that every student who is registered for a particular course, when that course is offered through the e-learning mode, indeed the student gets value for the money he or she has paid. I wish to thank you all for listening to me, and I'm hoping that this conference will be a good conference, happening as it is through the technology that we have now started to embrace and assume that it is going to be with us. I'm sure we will be listening and communicating and debating or discussing as we go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chacha, for those great opening remarks, which have actually set the stage for this year's conference or conversation. Colleagues, for those that are just joining in, welcome and good morning from wherever you are connecting from. This year's conference has participants from virtually every corner of the African continent, and we welcome you all, whether it's morning, afternoon for you, wherever you are, and even those that are connecting from abroad. As we continue, I want to remind us of our hashtag, which has been posted in the chat board, AHERI 2020 Virtual Conference. Keep those that are following via Twitter or other social media channels informed about this, the proceedings of this conference. We are also live on Facebook. Please share the link, especially with those that are practitioners in the education system across the African continent. I would like to take us back to our inaugural conference, which took place last year at the Tom Mboya Labour College in Kisumu City in Kenya. I know there are many that are connecting from different parts of the world, and most of them are used to Nairobi as the capital city of Kenya. We also have one of our cities on the shores of Lake Victoria that is called Kisumu City, where Africa Higher Education Research Institute is based. And we had our inaugural conference on the 11th and 12th of July 2019, which focused on information technology and higher education. We had an interesting set of speakers, most of whom have joined us for the 2020 conference. I can see Dr. Angira, who was a speaker in last year's conference, and many others who are on this conference as well. And when we were discussing information technology and higher education, we did not realize that COVID-19, or rather none of us actually had the foreknowledge that COVID-19 would happen, and practical implementation of practical use of information technology would actually be required in this season. In most of the countries, particularly in the global south, we've seen that education has basically come to a standstill or a stop. I know for those that are in Kenya that higher education institutions, especially universities, are resuming today to enable those that are in their final year to conclude their education program. But this would have been managed in a better way had we embraced higher education earlier. As we continue, we are going to look at the hits and misses, whether from a policy perspective or from a technical perspective, that made us sort of put education on a hold until the situation improved insofar as COVID-19 is concerned. Again, as a result of the 2019 conference, we actually translated some of the ideas into action. And this is actually with respect to the establishment of community networks that Professor Chacha has talked about in his keynote address. And just to illustrate the point home, one of the community networks that is actually, it was actually established in a technical and vocational institute at a place called Omuga, is actually currently being used for training purposes using e-learning. So this shows that this was an idea that was timely, and it is now being used to actually facilitate education in the rural areas. Before I go far, I would like to request my team to play a video just to show you what we've achieved in terms of the community networks and digital villages program, especially considering the challenges that COVID-19 has posed to the community. So after we watch the video, we shall transition into our next panel. Enjoy the video as we proceed.
We are here now at Akala Resource Center to inaugurate the first digital village.
It has been an interesting and innovative opportunity for us, considering the focus of AHERI is on research, because we have really put our research skills to the test by identifying or bringing network signals to places that hitherto did not have good access.
We see a great opportunity with the digital villages that we are setting up to bring the youth into the mainstream digital process.
We have implemented 3 internet community hotspots within our community network that covers Siaya, Kisumu, and Homa Bay.
I'm so excited at the opportunities offered by the digital villages, community internet that has been offered to us by AHERI.
We are grateful to the Basic Internet Foundation for the collaboration and partnership. We are looking forward to showcasing our digital villages and community network at the Africa Higher Education Research Institute conference that is slated for March 26th to 27th at the Tom Mboya Labour College in Kisumu. I take this opportunity to invite all of you and to invite partners who believe in digital inclusion and digital public goods to come and join us as we launch this great initiative.
Thank you. So as you can see, we embarked on a on a program or rather we embarked on an initiative of translating some of the ideas or papers that were presented into action. And we are glad that we actually have communities that are in this season using information technology to access education resources, and also technical and vocational institutions that are using it to facilitate higher education. We shall be sharing more about what we've been able to do since the last conference, and we will welcome more input and ideas on how this can be able to be improved. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, who is already on the call, Sarah Kiden. Sarah is has been involved in the higher education sector in the Research and Education Network of Uganda for a couple of years, and she is currently a Marie Curie Research Fellow at Northumbria University. Sarah, I welcome you to give a brief introduction of yourself and then start your presentation. Welcome. To those that are just joining, kindly ensure your microphone is on mute if you're not speaking, so that we can be able to proceed. You can also turn off your video so that we just concentrate on the main speaker. Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Barak, and good morning to everyone. I hope you are doing great. I actually hope you can hear me. I hope you're excited to join this conference. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this important event about innovations in higher education. I'm joining in from the lovely city of Dundee in Scotland, and it's 7 a.m. my time, so I had to wake up early to join, but normally you'd find me in Kampala, Uganda. My name is Sarah Kiden, and I am a Marie Curie Research Fellow on Open Design of Trusted Things, which is a joint program between Northumbria University and Mozilla to explore how to build a more open, secure, and trustworthy Internet of Things. My research sits at the intersection of the internet or things and communities. So I'm exploring possibilities for smaller scale local Internet of Things technology and how communities can be supported in making the best use of them. Now, to move a little bit into the focus of the event, I'll be talking about digital literacy, infrastructure development, and access. And I would like to agree with the previous speaker, Professor Chacha, that we have learned so many things during the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly related to the education sector. We have seen the benefit of digital tools and the internet in ensuring continuity in education. About 3 months ago, I wrote a blog for our project website about the digital divide during the pandemic. I was reflecting on things I had observed and experienced related to access to digital tools. So on the one hand, you had a part of the population that continued business as usual. They were working from home, attending online classes, online shopping, and the like. And on the other hand, you had people who were completely cut off from information, from work, from accessing class content because they didn't have access to the internet and technology. It's particularly sad because at the end of the day, both these categories of people are exposed to, required to perform and compete at the exact same level. So if you have to write exams, those who continued to access the internet and digital tools write the same exams like those who did not have access to the internet. I watched as in one part of the world, people posted pictures of virtual graduation ceremonies or defense of their PhD, and just imagined that on another part of the world, there are students who this was just like a dream to them. So in the case of Uganda, the Ministry of Education and Sports suspended online exams because I think there was a discussion in Parliament, and they said there are people who are actually in rural areas. They have poor or no connectivity. They are not able to write their exams. Of course, the nearest internet cafes were closed due to government restrictions on movement during the lockdown. So they developed a framework to guide continuity of learning for students. And they were recommending for students to use the internet, televisions, and radios. But we know that there are students who don't even have access to these things. So there was also printed material for students who could not access TVs, radios, and the internet, but you had to access this through your sub-county chief, your parish chief, and your local council leaders. So at the time I was writing the blog, which was 3 months ago, some reports were showing that there were students who had not yet got access to their printed class material. And it's very sad. So basically what that means is wealthier families can continue to provide quality education for their children and families. And the other people just have to be hopeful that, they'll be able to compete in this world. And this experience, by the way, is not unique to developing countries alone. In the UK, where I am right now, it's a developed country, so you'd expect that maybe people have access to better, but I think the government put aside 13 billion pounds or something like that, so that they can give laptops and tablets to children who could not access online education. So what does this tell us? It basically tells us that the way we've been doing things is not working well, and we have to find new and innovative ways, especially in a world that's becoming more technology driven. For institutions of higher learning, particularly, I believe there is a lot we can do, and I believe there's a lot we can learn from existing systems and practices. One thing for sure is that we have infrastructure in place, but it's not sufficient. We need to build even better infrastructure, especially in remote areas, because when I look at statistics, I think urban areas are not that badly off like rural areas. So in terms of capacity building, we also have to do massive awareness creation and capacity building to enable people to use digital tools. So sometimes you even have access to the things and yet you cannot use them. I remember an online event that my colleagues and I hosted, I think about 2 months ago. We saw that some children were going online, they were learning online. So we wanted to share tips about how they can stay safe online. So we saw people using Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, Blackboard, Moodle, and other tools. The interesting thing is that there are a number of people who can't even use these tools. I think we've seen memes or videos being shared for some people who basically they didn't know how to switch off their radios, their videos, or mute themselves, and we saw all sorts of things. So that means that we really need to build people's skills. And for some of us who are what I call digitally literate, it comes naturally. If you're given a tool, you somehow figure how to use it. But for other people, actually, they don't know how to do that. So we had to create a guide with visual prompts. We had to actually call some of the parents and guide them, take them step by step on how they could join the event. And we also need to understand that some parents are not literate in the first place, and they don't even speak English, French, or the languages that are used in schools. And yet, at the end of the day, they have to support children who are using these languages. So now to talk about my experience with Research and Education Network for Uganda. Disclaimer, I was not an employee of RENU. I was working on volunteer basis. I was approached and requested to help with the capacity building initiatives for RENU member institutions. So I think I may be a little bit biased, but I think research and education networks are definitely the way to go for higher institutions of learning. And if there are any higher institutions of learning that have not joined any national or regional research and education network, I think you need to join. The benefits are immense. So my institution, I was working at Uganda Christian University at the time, was the first to connect to the RENU network in 2014. And right now, there are actually over 200 connected campuses across Uganda. So you have the ability to buy bandwidth in bulk for member institutions, and it reduces costs for these institutions immensely. So in our case, as soon as we switched, we started paying a third of what we were paying to a commercial provider. So these savings that you make from bandwidth, you can actually redirect them to other tools or other things to support your network. there are things like the ability to share resources across campuses, because now campuses are connected. You don't all have to buy the same library material. Basically, some universities can buy, and you can, find a way to share these library resources across the universities. So my role specifically was coordinating capacity building initiatives, and we were building the capacity of system and network engineers to enable them to build and maintain better campus networks. The internet has been defined as a network of networks, and I personally believe that for the internet as we know it to work effectively, every small or large network needs to also be working properly as they plug into the larger network. So we need to ensure that our universities or our campuses have good networks as we plug into the larger network, so that we can actually improve the way that we access the network. So with support from partners like the Network Startup Resource Center, NSRC, Ubuntu Net Alliance, INASP, we conducted trainings around campus network design, network monitoring, security, and others. We hope that the training would help engineers to use the skills to support their networks better. We also conducted something called direct engineering assistance with support from our partner NSRC. And basically this was, we were going into campuses and assessing their networks to working together with the engineers at that campus to assess their networks and build. And if we had donations of switches and routers and other devices, we also donated and passed these on to campuses. And I can assure you it worked. At the time I slowed down on my volunteering due to other commitments, we had trained over 250 engineers, and now there are over 400 who have received training. And we've seen the difference this has made in the campuses. I know campuses, which I will not name, we went to them, they were paying high amounts of money for bandwidth, but they were not able to actually use their network. You could not even do a simple Google or internet search. So by the time we left, of course, you could see a difference that you can pay for bandwidth, but also you're not using it optimally because of the way you have designed your network. And there are also other interesting things like the ability to use EduRoam. I don't know if all of you know about EduRoam. EduRoam is education roaming, and it's an international roaming service for users in research and higher education. The way it works is that once a student or staff can authenticate and access resources at their campus, they can connect at any other institution, even internationally. So for me, it was interesting to be traveling, and then you get to a train station or an airport or another campus, and your emails just start coming in. So those are very many benefits that you can get from joining a research and education network. So as I wind up, I think if there's anything you will take away from my talk today is that we need to do better. We need massive capacity building. We need better infrastructure. We need to advocate for policy that will encourage better infrastructure to be built. We now have the numbers. We have now seen what COVID-19 has shown us. So we need to use this as evidence to advocate for better policy. And I think I've said a lot, so perhaps I should stop here and move on to the panel discussion. I'm also happy to hear from the other panelists and to take any questions, if any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, for those interesting reflections and some wonderful insights on the work that you've actually done in the past. I think what we are learning is that on the ground, things are always different, and you've really brought in an important perspective as someone who has been really involved in infrastructure development on the ground. And we believe this is what our governments and other stakeholders are struggling on. So on the panel, we have a team of experts from the private sector who've also been in practice. And I want to invite Mr. Michael Rasugu and Sally, who are already on the call. I'll just give them 1 minute each to give a brief introduction of themselves. But thereafter, I will then ask Mr. Rasugu to give his perspective on some of the comments that Sarah has shared. But most importantly, Mr. Rasugu, I would wish if you can share with us your thoughts on whether our higher education institutions are smart enough, considering the intervention or the comments that Sarah has made. So Michael, if you can hear me, you have the floor for a quick introduction.
I think the higher education institutions are getting there. And I think I'd like to just take it back to what Prof. Chacha said, that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we actually see people now rushing to, get on board with technology learning. So it has actually created such huge opportunities. And when I think about the digital villages as well, it shows that there are people within the higher education space who've been thinking about going forward. Now, what I always love to say is that there needs to be a place to move away from talking about what can we do, what does the future look like, and actually just do it. Because if I'm being quite honest, e-learning and technology learning in higher education has been an opportunity for the past 10 years. Now, it's a bit worrying how a lot of institutions, even those who could afford to jump onto the bandwagon earlier, are only catching up now. So I really like the points that Sarah raised, that we also cannot ignore the fact that even developed countries like the UK, they're not where they should be. But the questions we should be asking ourselves, I believe, is what can we do in our individual pockets, whether we are corporate and industry, whether we're higher education, whether we're research, what can we do in our individual pockets to actually see that, to see e-learning and technology enhanced learning becoming a reality. And I'd like to commend people like Sarah who've made sure that the infrastructure is ready for people who have solutions to plug in and make it work for us.
Thank you very much, Sally, for those quick comments that you made. I would just like to follow up with a rejoinder. Are there specific actions that you feel stakeholders such as government, the private sector, or for lack of a better word, even civil society that is very active in the rural areas on the African continent can be able to do to actually ensure that our students have access to e-learning? When you look at the rural setup, most of them are made up of technical and vocational institutions. Actually, you find that we have an interesting challenge in our countries nowadays. You may find that when we are setting up factories, we have to bring in engineers from the Far East, simply because what we think we have as plumbers are not really plumbers that, for instance, can set up high pressure systems for production environments in factories. So you find that maybe there is a disconnect between what is being delivered in terms of education and the product in terms of the graduates, especially from the rural areas. And I think Sarah has also highlighted the gaps that probably technology would assist to help in covering or meeting. So I don't know what your thoughts are. Probably you could share with us what can our governments do, what can the private sector do, and what, for instance, can the civil society or any other stake players in the rural areas do? You've rightly mentioned that we've been at it for 10 years, but we don't seem to even be scratching the surface. And the fact that we shut down most of our higher education institutions at the onset of COVID-19 is a stark reminder of what we've been doing over the last 10 years. So your quick reflections on the same?
Thank you so much for that, Barak. I mean, what you've said is actually so important to me. And, I spend most of my time trying to see what is it that we can all jointly do. And I think for me, it starts with what is the why? Why should people go on to technology learning even before the COVID-19? Why? Why should somebody in the rural areas pick up a computer, pick up a tablet and learn in that way? Once we answer the why, then government will see whether it is a big why for them to solve. I don't know if that makes sense. Because currently it's just technology companies, fantastic inventions coming, and we challenge the people, use these. But you actually get to a point of saying, why must I use this? And then it really goes back to that story that I gave you in the beginning, that I'm very passionate about the different styles of learning. I'll give you an example. In any given classroom setup, you will find those 4 learners that I talked about. And throughout these whole years of us having learning and education, only reading and writing learners have been catered to. And that they only make up about 3% of the whole learning population. Isn't that scary that only 3% can be taught in their learning styles? I mean, that also answers a lot of questions. Why aren't some people succeeding? Why such a high dropout rate when we get to high school? How come only such a small percentage of learners who started grade 1 are in varsity? Those are things to ask ourselves. And once we realize the need for e-learning and the need to have visuals, the need to have moving pictures, to have experiments showed to us, then we'll understand to invest in it. And I think you've mentioned something very, very important. TVET, or vocational and technical training colleges, those are actually what we need. I mean, if you look at our landscape, you'll see that the people who are more likely to create jobs, the people who are more likely to start businesses and not to go hungry, are people with skill. Now, we did a bit of a research some few years ago, and we found that university graduates stay unemployed for longer than properly equipped TVET graduates, because they actually have skill. You don't go hungry when you have skill. So now my challenge to us on this platform is, we are concentrating so much on higher education, but I just feel like the TVET market throughout the continent really has been forgotten. And this is an opportunity for us to invest in it. In terms of what civil society can do, I mean, first of all, I'm thinking about, and Sarah touched on it, ICT training, you know, and Prof also touched on it. Some kids don't even know how to use the hardware. Some of our educators don't even know how to use the hardware. So we need to make sure that we have buy-in from the parents, buy-in from the educators, buy-in from the learners. If we do not have buy-in, there's no way this is going to be successful. If you have buy-in, then you'll also realize that, okay, I need to equip these people. You will invest more in that. And then just on my final note, on civil society or on the community at large, what can we do? Sometimes I just feel like we wait a lot for government to come and bring solutions, to come and bring funding. I'm going to challenge us today and say, I did an experiment where I was looking at one of the poorest townships in South Africa. It's called Alexandra Township. And we said, look, if every family put in 50 Rand, it's a small township of about 3 million or so. If every family put on 50 Rand, not only will we be able to change the infrastructure, put the fiber that is required, but all the devices as well, all the training as well, and all the content. Now, 50 Rand is not too much. And I know somebody will say, but others just don't have it. Two things to that. Those who don't have it, you have others who have 100 Rand instead of 50 Rand. Let's cover our brothers. But most importantly, I've come to realize, if you don't invest in something, sometimes you may not appreciate it. So whatever it is that you can bring to the table for the mutual benefit of our children, of our teenagers, of our university students, let's put our minds together and actually come up with solutions, instead of waiting for companies to bring free solutions or governments to bring free devices, free access and all of that, because we must remember that companies are here to make money as well. So we need to, if we're going to get the best out of a company, we need to come to the party as well. We can get discounts, whatever the case may be. But if they're feeling they're giving us something for free, they'll give us the scraps. I don't know if that makes sense. You'll just get the crumbs. We don't want the crumbs. We want the best of the best. So we need to rise to the party. So that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Sally. You raised very important and pertinent issues, and you've actually put them across passionately. I'll come back to the audience, because I know there are also, there could be very interesting interventions from the audience shortly. But I want to come back to Sarah briefly. Sarah, you mentioned mostly your role, or rather assisting higher education institutions at university level to connect. Have you had any experience with technical and vocational institutions? Because these are really the guys that that build the skills of the artisans that we use on a day-to-day basis. If you want to fix your DSTV, for example, or your satellite dish, more often than not, you will not call upon a university graduate. You find that our technicians are people that have come through the technical and vocational institutions. So I don't know from your practice, or as you deploy the network, whether you took consideration some of these institutions. After you, I'll come to Mr. Rasugu, who I believe has been able to join the call. Sarah?
Okay. Thank you, Barak, and thank you, Sally, for those wonderful remarks. So in terms of for Research and Education Network for Uganda, at the time campuses started to connect in 2014, of course, the focus was universities and higher institutions of learning. But slowly they started to move away from that. You have research institutions, you have the Uganda Virus Research Institute, for example, the one like at the beginning of COVID-19, most of the tests of COVID-19, all the tests were being done at UVRI, the Virus Institute. So you have research institutions, you have the Medical Research Council, you have different higher institutions of learning. And I think in 2018 and 2019, they started to connect even secondary schools. So you've gone beyond just in universities to providing anyone who basically is giving access to education. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I want to turn to Mr. Michael Rasugu from Microsoft in education. Of course, most of us are aware of the fact that Microsoft has been one of the biggest investors in the education sector in terms of providing solutions that actually enable our learners to use digital tools for education purposes. But again, Michael, Sally has raised an interesting issue that we seem to be vendor-driven and not solution-oriented. And that's why after the 10 years of deploying e-learning solutions, we still shut down our university. I don't know what's your take on the same. You have the floor, Michael.
Thank you so much, moderator. Thank you, members. I hope everyone can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Michael Rasugu. I am the education lead for Sub-Saharan Africa at Microsoft. And it's a pleasure to really be here, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. Apologies again, I dropped briefly earlier because of connectivity issues, which is part of the things that have been raised. As I am in the village, and it's a true test of technology and really how we are able to access it from anywhere and anytime. So in terms of the question, it's a very good question around how are we going to ensure that we are really going to benefit from these tools and ensure that they're not vendor-driven, and we have a sticky model that actually the targeted end users who are the higher learning institutions, the TVETs, as Salia said, and really our educators and our students are able to benefit from this. From that approach, I believe that there are three important points, and some of the speakers have mentioned them. One is really trying to see what works best. And we find that sometimes you have very big and powerful tools that are given to, end users who don't need such power. Sometimes you can look at things like mobile phones, things like really simple tools that can be used in an instant. We don't have to say that because not every student in Kenya has a laptop or a computer back home that we can't continue learning during this COVID-19 period. And those are some of the advice that we've given the government, because it's a mindset that someone really has to have a computer. These days with digital connections, I'm sure quite a number of the attendees on this call are probably connected on mobile, and that's really the future. So that's one. The other one is the infrastructure. Again, the government plays a big role, but also us as the stakeholders across, we have a very big responsibility to see what kind of initiatives can we bring on the table to ensure that people remain connected. We can't have e-learning or we can't have remote learning if there is no connectivity. And it goes beyond the fiber links and the traditional internet to even things like data bundles. How can we work with connectivity providers, telcos, and the other partners to ensure that really the education sector is favored in having a more cost-effective model of connectivity through mobile. So that has been a very pertinent conversation that we've had with the key players across Africa. We believe that this is something that we can continue working together as stakeholders to ensure that really for e-learning and for this sort of continued learning from anywhere, there is connectivity. And the third one really is the stakeholder ownership, the executive sponsorship and buy-in. I think Sally touched on that as well, in terms of really the leadership from a government level, from our own institutions across Africa, believing that this approach works. You know, we can do such amazing work and saying, look, we have e-learning, you don't need to shut down during COVID-19. But if the leaders don't share the vision, then of course, sort of the followers will follow the leaders. So it always plays a very big role. And the success we've even seen, speaking on behalf of Microsoft, across the region is whereby the leaders owned it, where the leaders said, guys, we're not going to close these universities just because of COVID-19. We have the infrastructure, we have the tools, let's continue, and let's see how we can ensure that our students are not forgotten. So the stakeholder ownership is absolutely important, and we continue working even from a Microsoft perspective, and of course the broader stakeholders we have on this call. And really, it's a happy time to see that it's even being discussed in this forum, because that shows that really there is opportunity for us. Thank you. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I want to put you on the spot again. Who do you think is the main or key stakeholder towards ensuring that our higher education institutions are actually able to embrace and utilize digital tools or information technology, for lack of a better word, as we should? Is it government? Is it private sector? Is it the institution themselves? Because we seem to be passing the back and forth. What's your thought on the same?
I see you picked that up. Yes, I think we are passing the buck a lot because no one wants to own that. And to be honest, unfortunately, and we don't want to sound like how we normally see, you know, back in Kenya here, we have a phrase where we say tunaomba serikali, which means we're asking the government, you know, and really the reality is that if the government says close all schools, close all higher learning institutions, no matter how much buy-in you have from the leadership, really government has the first role. And really that really means that we need to keep shouting on this conversation, pushing it further and pushing the envelope to ensure that the government really gives us that executive sponsorship for us to be able to. With the government buy-in, then we need the leadership at the university level as well, both public and private, to really believe in this and own this. And I think it's a joke that we probably all agree that sometimes we find our leadership might not have, you know, been born in the technology era. So it needs a lot of effort to really bring this to their radar and them to understand that this is a good thing and it can work. I think it's always a risk about, if we push this forward, is it going to work? So it starts with government and the leadership, and of course the end users, the educators, the faculty play a huge role. You know, moving away from what we call the yellow stacks of paper that have been used over years to now using, you know, the digital space is a big step, but we can still all work together. So that's how I'd rank it, and I'm happy to get feedback from the other speakers and the listeners if there's a better approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. At this juncture, I would like to give my panelists a short break to take a glass of water or something. They've been speaking a lot, and I would like to invite the audience to ask questions or to ask the panelists. They really brought to the fore very interesting perspectives. And quickly raise your hand. I will pick the first 4 hands that are raised on the chat. Please, if you're not speaking, ensure your microphone is muted so that we can continue with a good flow to the program as we've done. I'm checking the participants list. I can't see any hands raised. Should I say going once, going twice?
There's a question from Festus, sorry, Barak,
Yes.
in the comment section.
All right, let me just, yes. So Festus' question is directed to Sally and Sarah. From your experience, what learning level, at what learning level need we introduce the technological learning from the primary or secondary school level? Thank you. I think Sarah and Sally, you've noted that. Any other question, even for the other panel, or comment from other panelists that are coming up? I see Jen, Irene. Jen, you have the floor. Kindly direct your question to the panelists that you would wish to respond.
Hello, I am Jane from Kenya, Maseno University. I am just asking, now when COVID came up, we were sort of politically pressured to close the schools, because once the government orders that all institutions must be closed, there must be, you must comply. So what can we do so that in future we may show the government that they should always need, even in times of crisis, to bring in all stakeholders so that we do not come to the point where we are right now? It appears like we really had nothing to do, or that we were incompetent, and yet it was that political opinion that caused the closure of institutions, even for those that are ICT apt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting question that I would have wished Professor Chacha to respond to if he's on the call. But I believe I'll give each of the panelists an opportunity to respond to that. I will pick Justice from Zimbabwe so that we get a diverse perspective. Justice, you can field your question, then I'll come to Simon Were.
Okay, thank you. My name is Justice Mkaro from Bindra University in Zimbabwe. I'm an undergrad student. My question, I think it goes to Mr. Michael Rasugu. You mentioned partnerships for development. You said stakeholder partnership remains key in advancing technology. So as students, which other continental or global organizations can we partner with to make sure we implement these strategies that we are speaking of at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice, for being brief and to the point. There's someone else who wanted to ask a question, but they seem to have changed their mind. I will invite Simon. Have you changed your mind? I've remembered it's Simon Were.
No, I still have the question, please.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Then I kindly request anyone that is not speaking to mute their mics. I can see several mics that are open. But at this point, I want to give the panelists the floor to respond to the questions that have been raised, starting with Sarah, and then Sally, and finally Michael. Sarah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Barak, and thank you, everyone. So to respond to Festo, I think, who was asking at what level we should introduce, I personally think we should introduce as early as possible. So I don't know if we have seen children these days at 2 years old, basically they will get hold of your phone, and the next thing you see, you're finding so many selfies, and you're like, how did they do that? I didn't show them how to do that. So we just need to introduce them to these things as early as possible. And it's because the way the world is going, it's going like more technology advanced. So the earlier you introduce them, the better advantage they have later on in life. Though I also want to stress that we need to talk about ways that children can be safe online, because at that age, you know, they are prone to so many things. Like they can go through all sorts of things online. So as we introduce them even at that early age, we need to think about safety online issues. And I can't remember the other person who was asking about engaging government. I think this is a continuous discussion that we have to have with stakeholders. Now that COVID-19 happened, and now that we saw the numbers, we can actually go to them. We can write policy briefs and, you know, summarize and say from our perspective as a university, these are the things we've seen during COVID-19, and we think if you adjust the policy in this way, or if you introduce a policy that does this, it will help us. Should there be a pandemic again, or should there be any calamity or disaster? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally.
Well, thank you so much, Barak, and thanks, Sarah. Those were some great points. I think I'll also start with what level should we, prepare our kids. And for me, the point is to enhance. So when your child is born, okay, I'm not a mother, but I've heard my friends say this. When a child is born, you're able to tell immediately, this one is going to be artsy, this one looks like they're going to be quite math focused. You know whether your child is a visual learner, an auditory learner, right from there. Put them in touch with technology. A friend of mine, their child is just turned 2 last week. This child watches YouTube, the children programs. She knows her alphabet. She knows her numbers. I don't know about you, but 2 years old, that is insane. So immediately when she goes to grade R or to, grade 1, she's going to take off quite quickly. So it just depends on you as the parent. And I like what Sarah said about digital citizenship. It's important. About last year sometime, 2 teenagers from the same family were found at the airport. They had been recruited for Boko Haram or ISIS actually, and their parents had no idea. If they had had proper ethical behavior training online and things like that, they would have avoided that. So really, it's a give and take, and you have to weigh it how it works for you as a parent. And then there was a question from Miss Jane from Maseno University. And I think I'd like to answer it with the other perspective. COVID-19 is a pandemic. And the leaders of the countries had to make decisions that looked like they were the best for everyone. They didn't, first of all, they didn't look at anybody's readiness. People had to not be close to each other, things like that. They had to close. Now, the challenge is, now that physical meetings were closed, could we continue without the physical meetings? And as far as I am aware, the government did not close activity. It closed physical meetings. I mean, I may be wrong. And I think from that, I would put it to the university themselves and say, once the government closed the doors or the physical meetings, what did the DVCs, the deans of the schools do to say, we may not be meeting physically, let's meet virtually? So I would turn it around. And then again, just the last one, Festus asked a question of how did it go with the community outreach, the contribution, 50 Rand, 50 Rand. I'm going to be quite honest with you and say, anytime you're working with a community, it's quite challenging because some people understand the why. Some people feel like they don't even have children in school. Why should they be participating? Some of them in that particular township, they would rather spend money on alcohol than on their children's learning. So what happens is we used quite a few of community leaders and government representatives to be the feet on the ground to help change those mindsets. And not everybody contributed, and not everybody's contributing because it's still underway because COVID will be with us for a while. So not everybody's contributing, but the point is we're not giving up, we're pushing and we're putting in the hard work. And I believe that in time, people will change their mindset and their thinking towards that. Thank you very much. I think those were the questions for me.
Thank you, Sally. What a powerful intervention again. And you got an interesting way with the semantics that the government did not close activities, they actually closed physical meetings. And you've really thrown it back to Jane. And I think I will call upon Professor Chacha later on after we get to hear from Michael to also give his perspective on the same. I don't know whether he agrees with what you've raised. And I would also like, as we conclude, to hear from Jen from a university perspective, whether now the problem seems to be at the university and not the government. With that, Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. Yes, I I will answer two questions. One is I'll continue with where Stanley stopped. Stanley stopped on the question around the schools being closed and the institutions, the government putting a halt to that physical meetings. I think I do agree. There was no, I believe there's no school or rather institution in Africa that was actually asked to stop. They just asked that the physical schools be closed. Even beyond that as well is probably then to say that, as we pointed out, the various stakeholders is the readiness, because I believe that even with the willingness being there, was the faculty well trained in terms of using these technology tools, these platforms like the one we are on? Were they comfortable to continue this from home? Were they enabled? Did they have the right devices, the connectivity and all that? And really to say that I think it's a role, a broader role, and that probably the stakeholders to make something like that a success in an institution comes from various points of contact, including the parents, the students, and of course the faculty, but the university administration plays the oversight role to ensure that this is possible. On the second question that I got from Zimbabwe, I think it's an amazing question that, yes, we've talked a lot about the institutions, the tools that are available for them, but what about the students? What is there for students? How can they implement this? How can they benefit from this? I really see this to be the best time ever for even students to see how they can move forward, how they can better themselves. Of course, the first stage is to look at the skills. How can they take advantage of the readily available skills now? We've seen that digital and really technological driven skills, or what they call 21st century skills, are really the future. So there are available resources around online in terms of skilling yourself to be at the forefront. We've seen that the technologically skilled people have been an advantage even during COVID-19 period. So that's a field to look at. Microsoft has thousands of free courses on Microsoft Learn. You can have a look at that. But even other different platforms as well have really put this out there. And also look out for these groups that are available on the likes of LinkedIn, and there are a lot of platforms of discussion around how you can be able to network and really be part of this conversation. The other component of the same question, probably if you're asking from the infrastructure side, how can the students benefit and how can they be part of this conversation as well? Is there a lot of programs out there? Microsoft has a program for devices where students really can get the software for, I think, almost free. And I'm happy to share these details later, but I know that there are a lot of opportunities for students, especially during this COVID-19 period, that you can benefit. Thank you, and back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I'll come back for another quick round. I see colleagues joining us from West Africa. Welcome on board, and everyone that is also joining from Southern or any other part of the conference or abroad. I know we started quite early, and most of you are just joining in. There was a question that was raised on how we can avoid a scenario where government just closes the institutions of higher education without broad consultation. And we have Professor Chacha, Nyaigoti Chacha, who was our keynote speaker, and who also chairs the Commission for University Education. And it would be interesting to hear his perspective on the same. I also see some hands that are raised up. I'm going to give an opportunity to Perez Odera, who is also a key stakeholder in our institution, and Dr. Charles Angira to give their interventions. I also see Dr. Mary Aswan, Dr. Aswan, sorry, who will be speaking much later, and I would like to hear their perspectives on the same. But now I give the floor to Professor Chacha. Professor, what would you say we should do to ensure that we don't shut down institutions of higher learning without broad consultation in case we are faced with a pandemic or a similar challenge in future?
I think, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Professor.
Yeah, I think the starting point is to have a national policy that informs the institutions on what actions to take when they are faced by such a calamity. It is important that when we strive, we don't seem to be caught unawares. We should be aware that some of these challenges will continue facing the human race, and as far as we are concerned as a country and as a continent, we need to initiate policy frameworks within which actions can be acted upon, so that we don't let the blame, for example, or the decision-making process lie on an instantaneous office, such as the office of the Cabinet Secretary in the case of Kenya, so that we then expect that he will create miracles, even when there are no miracles. It is important that when such situations are faced, institutions should be aware. Individually, as institutions, they should have built a framework within which to react and how to manage the challenges which are brought to bear by such a kind of calamity. And at the national level or at the continental level, we need to keep the conversation on the table, so that at the end of the day, we don't just expect that we will learn from what other continents or other nations have done in the world. I think it's important for us to just be clear in our minds that we were not living in isolation, and that challenges such as the COVID-19 may come from wherever it will come, and when it is faced by us, this is how we shall react. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. You actually raise an important perspective that has reminded me of disaster response or disaster recovery mechanisms that most of our banking institutions and other critical institutions normally have. And as a matter of fact, I was participating on a virtual conference last week, and someone shared an example where Australia, I think, is actually classifying what it considers as critical infrastructure at a national level, and the responses that should be taken in the event of a calamity similar to the COVID-19 pandemic. So from the question that was asked by Jen, it appears that maybe at the National Security Council, probably the higher education institutions were on the menu, but not necessarily on the table. Hence, the arbitrary decision that was made to shut down the institution. With that, I also want to invite Mrs. Perez Odera, who has raised her hand for a while now to make her intervention, and then we'll have Dr. Charles Angira. Mrs. Odera, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. The first thing I would like to say is to appreciate the timeliness of this discussion, given the fact that in many aspects of development, perhaps Africa tails other continents and countries as they go ahead in the improvement of communication channels. And so I do appreciate this, and I want to congratulate AHERI for putting this in time at this particular time. Now, the importance of virtual learning cannot be overemphasized. And a little earlier on, I had a few of us talking about when to introduce this to young people and so on and so forth. But even as important is how to educate our communities to understand what is going on and how some of them can actually continue to engage. And I do believe that connectivity will be a very important aspect of what we are discussing today. Whom do we need to connect with at the policy level and also at the practical level, so that our discussion does not end in the books or in some records anywhere where they are not being used. As someone who has been in the community work for decades, I feel that this kind of initiative should be seen in terms of how it can be rolled out to areas of need. And I just want to trust and believe that by the end of the 2 days, we will be able to have developed an action plan, and also we will be able to have interrogated certain systems that we have in terms of what they have done that is very useful to the communities, very useful to families, because our concern is that we should be able to have the development of people who are self-analyzing, who can see a situation and act immediately and act in the right direction. At some point later on, it will be very key for us to see that we connect even with research departments of the various universities, so that when there is a calamity or when there is a pandemic like what we have had, then there are people who are responding to the same immediately, instead of us waiting for probably some other country to send us money to buy masks. And a mask is what can be made, you know. These are the kind of concerns that I have as one who have worked at the lowest level in the community, but has also traversed to the policy level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Odera. You raised very pertinent points or very important issues. And actually what you're saying is we need to move from talking and really walk the talk. And this is the challenge we seem to be facing. And you also raised very important perspectives on the issue of ensuring that we educate our communities. And you are talking about digital literacy, which some of our panelists have been touching on. And clearly there seems to be a disconnect between the practitioners or service providers and what's happening on the ground. And you have also emphasized on the issue of connectivity, which we shall be discussing at length in the afternoon. Without belaboring the points, I'll come back to the panelists for a closing round later on, but I want to give the floor to Dr. Charles Angira to also make his intervention.
Thank you, Chairman. And I greet all the panelists and participants in this conference. My name is Charles Angira, and my contribution to this is AHERI. When we had the first conference, we were focusing onto social media as a means or mode of passing information and learning. And we didn't know that COVID pandemic was on the way. So when it struck us, then the whole system, I looked at it round and I said, what? And thank God, our elder, Professor Chacha, was also with us. As one who sits in the office and in classes teaching in the university, I was so perturbed and I was wondering, how are we going to handle this? But I think this is let me just use it, the word, this is a good start for AHERI, more so in Kenya. It's very relevant. I don't think, and I don't imagine any organization that had started talking about virtual learning before we could see, before we were struck by COVID. So, and at executive level, we've been discussing this issue of how do we go on and educate our young ones using virtual platforms and without compromising the quality of our graduates. This has been something that has been lingering on my mind as somebody who has been taught through physical all through and limited levels of virtual, like very few occasions when I could receive notes or material, learning materials from lecturers or even getting in publications. more so when I was doing my research. It's a big question whereby we use all the faculties, all the medias that we have on virtual understanding. So we must, when we are discussing this issue, we must give it the necessary attention that it deserves. And we must learn from our colleagues. And I would start by asking my colleague from South Africa, Sally, because they are saying that they are doing something. That small something that they are doing, please, can you tell us, may you share with us how you are handling the technical subjects? Like when we are in the medical sector, how are we handling our practical sessions that are very key in your country? And what are some of the challenges that you are facing that even Commission can start maybe building from there and even share with the policy, because now policy is also being informed or developed with the views or points that are gathered from the policy consumers or implementers, because that is very important. And because I've talked about technical areas, because we are now saying that we are doing our programs, if we leave alone the classroom lectures that we are sending notes and maybe we are talking with the students the way we are now talking, how about the way you are managing the postgraduates, more so the postgraduate when it comes to defenses of their thesis or project work, so that at least we don't compromise so much. And your experience, not only from South Africa, but I've seen a lady from South Africa shared with, is a presenter. And for that reason, maybe he can share with us, and we will try as much as possible to share, so that at least, because Michael, I see Michael is sharing from the experience from Kenya, that you can also benefit from, because when we come to a conference, we need to share our experiences so that we take good practices, and also we take note of lessons that we learned from here so that we go back and correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think I would like to put Lina on the spot, who is also one of our panelists, for some quick comments before I come back to my main panel for closing remarks and their parting shot. And I believe a number of questions have also been raised specifically to Sally. You can prepare for the same, and then we will conclude the session. Lina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. Just to respond on what Dr. Charles has mentioned, one of the things he has said that as a lecturer over time, even during his time, they didn't have much involvement with online either learning or teaching. And we're expecting that these are the people who are supposed to now administer online teaching, assessment, and examination for the student. So one of the things that educational institutions, be it at TVET level or at university level, will be able to do is work towards attitude change, not just on the students, but also on the academic staff that we have. Knowing that we have different academic staff at different departments and faculties, some may not be very tech savvy and versant with ICT skills. So if you're asking a lecturer, for example, who's not very tech savvy, to be able to conduct a class online on a platform that he himself does not understand, then it means that capacity building is very, very important. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Sally who mentioned capacity building as very, very key earlier, and also Sarah as well, not just for the student, but also for the teaching staff as well. In my experience in academia, because from the time COVID started, when our institution went online, were able to do classes online, are able to do exams online, one of the challenges we had was to be able to take training staff or teaching staff through the platforms that we were going to be able to use. But you find that universities were closed very abruptly. There was no social gathering, for example. They could not come back to the universities. So they are already home. Nobody has taken them through the platforms they're supposed to be able to use with the students. So they have to grapple around in the dark to be able to offer, learning for the students on the platforms they don't be able to understand. So capacity building and training will have to happen a lot, even in the future, so that we are very ready for anything that may happen like this one. And I think even in the future, having a form of blended learning is very, very important. We know universities or institutions that only offered classroom teaching, nothing online. And with COVID, we've seen that it is possible to offer blended learning so that in case something happens, whereby we cannot be able to have physical classes, then we have staff who are resilient enough to be able to adopt back to online learning and can be able to continue with the students online, even as a pandemic or whatever it is that has happened is being sorted in the meanwhile that has affected the physical classes. He's also asked a question on technical subjects. One of the things that we've been able to do in our institution is to use various technologies to be able to help students with the practical skills. Because my institution majorly tackles ICT and technical subjects and programs as well. So then you want to be able to use simulation packages, for example, for the practical sessions that you're doing with the students. You're using technologies, for example, like AnyDesk, so that a lecturer can log into the student machine and be able to demonstrate, for example, the practical side of the program or the unit that they are taking at that particular time, so that then the student still is able to be able to follow the practical and the hands-on skills they're expected to do. However, still the challenge is there. For example, if you're teaching a student technical skills, for example, in networking, maybe you're teaching a student in CCNA. You know, for the student to be able to configure, for example, a router or a switch, they need to have, you know, the router and the switch physically. So there are some of the challenges we still have. How do we still ensure that, yes, we have simulation packages, you can log into a student machine to be able to take care of that. But still the student wants to see the switch and the router and configure it for them to be able to say, okay, yes, I'm confident of the skill that I gained. And if I went into a company and I'm the network engineer, for example, then I can be able to configure their network properly, and I'm confident on the skills you know, that I got from this particular institution. So those are some of the gaps that we still have at the moment. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lina, for those wonderful interventions. Indeed, we have a lot of knowledge in this virtual room, and I encourage each one of us just to come forth and share. We intend to document all this useful feedback that is being given back, and we look at a way of disseminating the information through policy briefs to the various stake players that have been identified, so that we stop talking for another 10 years. You know, Sally told us we've been at it for 10 years, and now we need to do something in the next 10 years, so that when we are at a point like this, we will be able to say we've actually translated our ideas into action. I would like to come back to the panel for closing remarks. And I have one question over and above the many other issues that have been raised by participants. What practical measures as you respond to the panelists, what are some of the practical measures that need to be taken by government, by academia, which is the focus of this conference, by civil society, and by private sector in ensuring that digital literacy is properly conducted and infrastructure development is also properly done, taking into consideration the many ideas that have been raised, because we also have specialists in community development who are part and parcel of this conversation. We need to have clear and tangible take-homes so that in the next conference, we have a report to give on the progress that we've been able to make. I'll start with you, Sarah.
Thank you, Barak. I think for me, I would just conclude by saying that we need to work on issues around knowledge for researchers and educators to be able to use the tools available to them. I think Sir Michael has already told us that there are many tools that are available, so we need to just empower people to use these tools better. The other thing is that perhaps will be handled in the panel in the afternoon is around infrastructure and being able to support the people who support these networks. So our IT officers, our systems engineers, our network engineers, are they actually able to build networks that support e-learning, because that's another thing altogether. You may have all the money, you may have all the infrastructure. For example, you have fiber to your institution, but are you able to support this better? Then in terms of policy, I cannot think of a better time than this to advocate for better. We have seen the numbers, we have seen what has happened in 2020. So we need to just be ready to just prepared for anything, but also I think this preparation will just help us to deliver better generally. And in terms of government and policy, I think now government has to also start investing infrastructure in education. So we are not saying that this should be left only to private companies or to the institutions. We need to be able to partner. And I think someone earlier on was talking about a multi-stakeholder approach. Everyone is playing their roles. The educators are playing their roles. Government is doing things around policy and things like that. Internet service providers or other providers are giving us access to the tools. And I've seen like many of them do corporate social responsibility. So one of them could be maybe providing connectivity to a rural institution and things like that. So yeah, that would be my concluding remarks, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for setting the scene for this interesting conversation. We look forward to more interesting sessions in the afternoon, but you've done a great job. I'll move to Sally, and before Sally speaks, I can see a comment from Mildred at Church on the chat. Welcome, Mildred. She says, with augmented reality and virtual reality, the need for handling physical equipment may reduce. And I think she's actually responding to the question that was raised by Dr. Charles Angira. But Sally, you have the floor. You can touch more on what Mildred has also presented as you make your closing remarks.
Thank you so much again for this amazing platform. The more we hear, the more I understand who we have online. I just wanted to say to Mama Perez, thank you for all the work that you've done in the community. I'm actually quite interested to just connect and see what we can do and have the activities far reaching even to South Africa. So really awesome. And my closing remarks really is, we need to start with knowing the why. Let it not just be a policy shift that we don't understand why we're shifting. We've done so much research. AHERI is an example. Nobody can not understand, or nobody can dispute the power of e-learning and the power of technology enhanced learning. We just need to put it to work now and actually make it work for us. And then again, let's not wait for handouts. Let's come up with the solutions ourselves. Let's create. You know, COVID-19 has given us such an opportunity, and it's the time for decisive leadership. Coming back to policy, like what Sarah was saying, we know what works. The research has been done. We just need to be decisive as governments of Africa to just say, this is what we're going to do. This is how long it'll take us. This is how much we're putting on the table. And of course, I don't need to say anything about corruption. You know, I'm from South Africa. There's too much of it all the time. So I would just like to challenge our leaders. Can we use the money for what is needed? Otherwise, 20 years from now, we'll be looking and nothing has been achieved. And then to what Dr. Charles said, Miss Lena just covered everything. For technical skills, I feel like you took the words right out of our mouths. What I would like to challenge big companies that can, like Microsoft, Michael, don't shoot me, but I would like to challenge you to adopt the smaller companies that are actually doing work within the digital space. You know, I'll talk about my company. For example, for technical skills, we are partnering with a small little technical college because we want to create things for welding, things for sewing and things like that, TVET subjects, which, you know, don't bring in so much money. So the bigger corporations don't really play in that space. So for the bigger companies, I would just like to encourage you, come on board with us, or let us come board with you. Let's create something that works. We all know on this platform, we've said it over and over, that technical know-how and technical subjects are the way to go to take Africa, forward. And we all know that in about, 20 years, we'll be the biggest community in the world. Really, we need to take advantage of it now because Africa has the solutions. The more I hear everybody speak, the more I know Africa has the solutions. We need to come together and make it work. Stop working in silos. Yes, it's not a Kenya solution. It's not a South Africa solution. It's not a Uganda solution. Let's come together and create a borderless solution. That's the way we're actually gonna create impact and bring the solutions that we have to the world. So I think those are my parting remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sally. That was powerful. And you remind me of a phrase I read in a book, Building People, Building Dreams, that he who knows how is always at the mercy of he who knows why. I think you've kept hammering on the why, and indeed, we are taking it home. Before the next session, I think we might have some answers. I come back to Michael for closing remarks.
Thank you, moderator. And once again, it's a pleasure. It's really been a very good discussion. The panelists have been brilliant. Personally, I've also learned a lot today, and I think it's been a very good discussion. So to quickly roll back to some points that were raised by Dr. Angira, been covered by Lina, and Sally has also touched on it. Yes, Sally, definitely we do value these partnerships, and that's the way to go, absolutely. And the areas around focusing on the likes of higher education, TVETs really is the future. And I want to comment on the question by Dr. Angira that was covered by Lina and you, Sally, is that yes, we are not able to really replicate the technical sort of trainings that you get when you go hands-on, but technology is really advancing, and that's the area we should focus on. I believe that we're going to reach a point whereby we want to still continue, training across Africa, what AHERI is doing and many other institutions, and not everyone can be physically present. And we are moving further beyond simulations, I'm happy to tell you, Lina. And we're even looking at now the virtual reality world, where you can use equipment, wear something and you get into this whole world where if you're learning medicine, you're able to operate on a heart, you're really doing mechanical, and you can actually open up an engine. And it's not physical touch, but you can try as much as possible to get as close as possible to the physical world. And really, it's why we have technology, and technology will continue advancing. And these are conversations we can continue having and really see how we can benefit. But really, to emphasize on the point around partnerships, working on a broader picture and not doing it in silos. Agreed, Sally, on that. And we are happy to really engage, especially scaling up and getting to get additional sort of insight and ideas and some areas we can benefit all together to really be able to give value. But my parting shot is to really commend the entire team and to say, let's keep pushing. Let's have this conversation. I know we still see a lot of pushback from government because they believe that without infrastructure, they cannot prioritize some of these conversations we have. But I want to challenge us. If we look at the first world countries, the likes of the countries we traditionally benchmark, like the USA and the UK and all that, if you really look at the USA, for example, there are many, many countries, there are many, many states that have very low internet connectivity, low electricity, but they still run with these programs. We can't say that because only 5 or 10% of our students have access to infrastructure and connectivity that we cannot run the program. That's how it all started. Let's start with the small number we have. Let's build up this digital literacy. And in no time, in the next 5, 10 years, we've said we'll be at 40, 50%, and in no time we'll actually have 100%. But we can't get to 100% if we don't start. I think this is a message we can send back to our leadership, both in government and of course across all stakeholders, that it has to start now, and we can't wait for a day that there is. But thank you so much all, and back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Michael. What a way to conclude. Indeed, even Kisumu City was not built in a day. I don't want to talk about Rome because I don't live in Rome. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great morning session. Thank you all for connecting from different parts of the world. I want to invite you to an even more interesting session in the afternoon, in which we will be discussing digital infrastructures in education. It will start at 2 p.m. East African time. which is 11 UTC, to those that are connecting from West or Southern Africa. And we still invite you to bring in your interesting perspectives to the conversation. But as we wrap up, I want to thank my panel for very interesting perspectives that they have brought on board. I will start with Professor Chacha Nyaigoti Chacha, who gave the keynote remarks. Thank you very much, Professor. I want to also thank Sarah, who has set the scene for this interesting conversation. Michael and Sally, you've done a wonderful job. I can't see an emoji that I can use for a round of applause, but I'm sure wherever our speakers or wherever participants are, they're already stamping their feet, appreciating the work that you've been able to do. As we conclude, we are going to wind up with a video that we played when we were starting, just to show one of the outcomes of the last conference that was held in July last year, which is the AHERI Community Network and Digital Villages project. With that, see you at 2 p.m. and enjoy the video. Thank you very much for tuning in. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you are connecting from. Welcome to the 2020 AHERI virtual conference. This year's conference is centered around the theme Innovation in Higher Education. This is part 2 of the conference. We had a very interesting session in the morning, which you can be able to access later on because the sessions are all recorded. We are live on Facebook and we are also live on Twitter under the hashtag AHERI 2020 virtual conference. I encourage each participant to tweet and retweet. In the afternoon session, we are going to have a presentation centered around digital infrastructure and education. And our key speaker will be Professor Joseph Knoll from the Basic Internet Foundation and the University of Oslo, who will be talking shortly once I hand over the floor to him. It will be followed by a panel discussion, which I will moderate. And our panelists will be Nodumo Lamini from the Association of African Universities, Father Hunsi Sefunmi from the Oracle Academy, Magdalene Odwok from the Institute of Advanced Technology, Nancy Soila from the Kenya University and Colleges Central Placement Service, and finally Matogoro Jadbera from the University of Dodoma and a fellow at the Mozilla Foundation. So we have a very interesting panel that is coming up. But before we move into the presentation, I would like to just introduce the session with opening remarks from the Institute Director, Mr. Robert Owino. Will thereafter be followed by a video just showcasing the outcome of one of the papers that was presented in the 2019 conference, so that we then proceed to this session. So enjoy as we watch the introductory remarks.
Our keynote speakers, presenters, and participants, greetings to you all and a warm welcome to the AHERI 2020 conference. The possibility to utter these words in context of the COVID-19 pandemic is a testament to the capabilities and commitment of humanity to adapt. This conference was slated for March, but we had to cancel upon proclamation of the pandemic. AHERI continues to be relevant and committed to creating solutions through collaboration of academia, industry, and government. AHERI's goal is to support sustainable and transformational development in Africa through higher education. The following are the key objectives of AHERI: to promote and support networking among higher education researchers in the region, implementation of research aimed at improving Africa higher education, promotion and support of publication and documentation on Africa higher education, and finally, lobbying and advocacy for the adoption of the research findings in decision-making within higher education. AHERI's rallying call, Ideas into Action, continues to guide us as we participate in this conference. From AHERI 2019 conference, a network of enthusiasts championing ICT in higher education followed through the idea of community networks as a tool for development. The team tapped the idea of community networks to action by deploying digital villages in 3 sites. The digital villages deployed through partnership with some of the participants have been subject of study in a number of international fora and continues to inspire upscaling. This year's AHERI conference theme of innovation in higher education is relevant in addressing traditional challenges facing education sector and the emerging concerns due to the pandemic. In our deliberations, we would like to view the disruptions to learning as opportunities to catalyze innovations and transformation of higher education in Africa. As we deliberate on innovations in higher education in our discussions, the following questions will guide us. How can we leverage technology in increasing access and quality of higher education? What skills and competences are needed to maximize impact of innovations? Do we have suitable and sufficient infrastructure to support innovations? Which statutes and laws govern innovations in higher education? Are there funding and investment opportunities? Will pedagogy and methodologies change to ensure business continuity? In the next 2 days, the presentations from keynote speakers, paper presentations, and panel discussions will be interactive and from diverse perspectives. To have the optimum virtual conference experience, kindly share your thoughts and questions on the chat platform. We look forward to identifying potential projects from the networks established in the conference for implementation. At the end of the conference, we shall share the proceedings, which shall cover the ideas that have been presented and identify potential projects that shall be initiated and presented in the next conference. I therefore take this opportunity to wish us all productive and stimulating discussions at AHERI 2020 conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2020 virtual conference follows a successful conference that was held in 2019 from 11 and 12 July. And as you've heard, the clarion call for Africa Higher Education Research Institute is Ideas into Action. From last year's conference, a paper on community networks was presented by Matogoro Jabera from the University of Dodoma, and we took it up as a practical idea that could be implemented, and it resulted in 3 digital villages or a community network with the support of the Basic Internet Foundation. We will showcase a video on the same, which has been playing throughout the session as we waited for the second session to start. And thereafter, I will invite Professor Noll to give his presentation. Enjoy the video as we watch it. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I would like to invite Professor Joseph Noll to make his presentation, after which we shall have interventions from the ABLE panel that is scheduled for this afternoon session. Professor Noll, you have the floor. You can share your presentation.
Sorry, it's always like starting the first stop in a digital story of sharing what you want to share, which is always like the challenge, even though being a professor for information technology. So thank you a lot for inviting, and thanks a lot, Robert, for the startup putting out the main question on how to leverage quality access, skills, infrastructure, regulations, as well as what is our pedagogy. So I wanna take that opportunity to actually tell that at the University of Oslo, we have taken this step by saying that, yes, we will educate people, but we also build this basic internet foundation to actually focus on the digital inclusion and what is ever out there. And what I want to focus, I want to just set the scene and then leave it out to us for a discussion. So I'd rather be quick here to point out what is our way forward to what people call education 5.0 or education 4.0. There are different terms out. It depends which school you are looking at. This is like one of the pictures. Thanks for sharing previously the digital villages, and I'm very happy now to show that. Well, with the help of the communities, we can really make the change. And that help of the communities means not only the people on the ground, it means also academia, and it means entrepreneurship, it means the whole ecosystem of getting things done. So from that point of view, I start here with a short intro from Zimbabwe, where in Zimbabwe, the focus was on getting away from the traditional way of teaching towards research-oriented teaching, meaning teaching about what you really deal with in research, which has been typically called Education 2.0, then involving the students in whatever you are doing. And then we come to having the mindset changed from learning knowledge to creating innovation of what you do with your knowledge. So it's about a mindset change, because what we actually see is that, you know, our knowledge is never ever any longer than, let me put a number, 3-4 years. Then we have to refresh our numbers. What I see from my personal, I'm one of these old guys, you see gray hairs, gray beard, nothing really that shows that I'm young in mind. But what I've seen is about every 7 years, there is a dramatic change in what I'm doing and where I put the focus on. And that has been the background why I see now in the society, we see that automated processes, industrialization, mechanics in agriculture is going to change our society so dramatically and will probably make the divide even bigger. So I also put out another nice report, which I'd love you to share. I will afterwards with you share the link, or maybe Emmanuel or Barak, you can share the link to the presentation such that everyone can click on these links. It is the World Economic Forum who put out the School of the Future, where they actually say that that is the focus on what is industry going to do and how can we respond from an educational sector to get this, the skills needed for the Industrial Revolution done. I'm going a step further on that, because I actually say, well, fit for Industry 4.0, that means we need to understand, for example, how our teaching needs to be solved. We need to understand how artificial intelligence and information everywhere can actually help us to put our students into the way of understanding where to focus and how to focus. And the one which I still suffer a lot is the story of personalized learning. You know, I'm one of these guys who wants to have something in my hand. If I have something, if I can write something, that is where I can learn. Or if I put my fingers out, that's how I can learn. But how I bring that over to my students to make my teaching such that my students understand what is the way of assessing. Still a long way to go. Question is, what we do traditionally in terms of testing, in terms of exams, is that really what is going to come out? Or shouldn't we be there where we much more focus on the understanding of education? And the last spot here is the intelligent digital and physical area, which actually means that these days, COVID-19, we are all used to hybrid seminars. We are all used to sit digitally, though I would have loved to be in Kisumu together with you, or next year, to actually have the chance of talking with you in the break and having this inspiring environment, which we only get if we are together in a room where we can talk to each other. So personally, I think COVID is one of the biggest frustration. But now let me jump immediately to Education 5.0 and then jump in why I think we still have a long way to go. So Education 5.0 is not only the cognitive skills, being literacy, numeracy, being critical thinking, being problem solving. It's also that what we need to understand in Industry 4.0. But apart from that, it's much more about becoming a human being, having a sense of understanding, which actually means that we can only solve things together in a teamwork. And I can tell you that event which we had in Dar es Salaam in hacking, sitting together from 5 countries, making the infrastructure work, that was so fantastic. And that is the type of collaboration which I want to get out to. And that again has to do something with leadership. The old traditional leadership is out. Knowledge is power. But of course, if knowledge is power, knowledge threatens the traditional leadership models. And we see that everywhere in the society, where the white men who have the professors are the ones who are telling you what's right or wrong. But what I always tell my PhD students is, at the first time when they tell me, Joseph, this is bullshit, forget about what you're saying, it's simply wrong. I know. Then I say, now. When I hear this no, then I understand that the student is there where he has this critical understanding and can say no to his professor. At the same time, it's the cultural awareness. I'm German, and whenever you talk about the German, you know that the Germans tell you how to look into the future. The Germans don't have any cultural awareness. The only culture they have is drinking beer and playing soccer. And by the way, that is something we are doing good, but that's a different story. What I want to add on, which I haven't found anywhere in this Education 5.0, is actually our responsibility as a human towards the global challenges, towards how we can tackle the climate crisis and how we can tackle a common sustainable future by answering to the Sustainable Development Goals. The 230 indicators for the 169 targets of the 17 goals of the Agenda 2030. That is what we really need to transfer, and we need to make ourselves, our companies, our universities, and our governments responsible that what is indicated in the SDGs is really taking place. And that's a long way to go. Having said that, what I see is that the digital divide is frustrating. I often cite my dear friend Kate Gilmore from the United Nations in Geneva. When she talked about internet, she said, internet had the capability to dismantle the divide. Internet failed completely. The divide is bigger than ever. The divide is bigger than ever because boys have the toys, boys have the smartphones. I just studied from a late report here from Bangladesh showing that 33% and less than half, 16% of females have a smartphone. And I know that from my visits in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, in Rwanda and other places in Uganda, it's the same story. Yes, of course, every girl who understands that the future is digital will try to get a smartphone. But that is really, really hard to get. And then the second story is the story of mobile broadband access. I mean, who can pay for the access to the internet? And that is why we need to jump in and say that we need to start at one place. And maybe the place to start are our schools and our universities. We have the SDG indicator 4A1 of the percentage of schools connected to internet. And if my numbers are right, then we talk in Tanzania about 3% of the schools who are connected to internet. Looking at Ethiopia, we have like 3,500 secondary schools and none of the primary schools which is connected to internet. And that really needs us to think about a digital transformation and what we need to bring the digital transformation out. So our theory of change, and I copied that from my dear friend Catherine Kimambo from African Child, who actually said that, you know, school information needs to be freely available. Maybe not everywhere, but at least at the school. So whoever comes in the vicinity of the school shall have the chance to get his school content live. And the second is what we have is the use of digital friends. We need to rely on people who build trusted information out to us and who can show us the way such that we don't end up in the dark net of the internet, in the network of pedophilia, in the network of you know what, but that we really use the internet to empower ourselves. And that we can only do through community engagement. And our solution or our suggestion here is that we need to talk about meaningful internet. And our meaningful internet actually means that we look into lightweight content, being text and pictures, giving a good user experience, even on a slow network, and having little mobile data. And then we talk about heavy content, where we think that education videos, health videos, and so on and so forth should be at schools and should again be freely available for everyone. And then what we put out in order to keep a cost control is to have a restriction on what can be freely accessed. And that freely accessed is meaningful information on trusted sites, such that we really show how can the internet help myself to be empowered. Having said that, I'll very shortly want to bring to your attention a report from the government of Norway. Because it's the government of Norway and because Norway is sitting in the Security Council, we actually believe that the principal ideas which are coming out, access, skills, regulation, and inclusion, is exactly that what Robert started in the video today, where he said, how can we leverage quality access? What are the skills we need? And how can we build the infrastructure? Oops, Philip, now you started sharing screens. I take over again.
Yeah, please take over, Prof, again. We'll disable that other screen.
Okay, so it's about the cost of the access. And what I said, I'd like to be there where I say, I want to be less than $20 a month for a school. I want to be there that access to information is free for everyone. And by that one, I'd like to stop and just bring one last slide up. And the last slide is actually what we have thought about with our partners on how we can get things going. And our idea here is that we can't look to things in silos an education silo, a health silo, an agriculture silo, an innovation silo. We have to bring things together. And the way we bring things together is that we actually say, we need trusted information on education, to be on health, to be available for everyone in the society. That is this green box. The second box for me is equally important. And that is, we all are focused on job creation and innovation. And the way we can do job creation is, of course, that we work on data. We work on data which are available in our country, in our community. And these data can be sensor data from agriculture, can be water content of the earth, can be measures of wind speed, or whatever protections we need. That is the new model which we need to make available for everyone. And that invites for public-private partnership. And the last thing here is, for me, the aspects of the regulatory issues, which I think is pretty easy, because you can put into any license, into license for a mobile operator, into a license for an ISP. You can put in the free access to the knowledge portal as the one sentence, which will allow the free access to knowledge and the trusted internet. And by that one, Barak, I give the share to you. I hope this was okay to set the scene for our discussion on skills, infrastructure, laws, pedagogy.
Thank you very much, Professor Noel, for that interesting presentation that has actually set the scene for us. To our audience, those that are just joining, welcome to the AHERI 2020 conference, whose theme is innovation in higher education. In 2019, we looked at information technology and higher education, and we are evolving the conversation as we move along. I think COVID-19 has proven, or rather brought to the fore, the need and the importance of information and communications technology in the higher education space. Our presenter was Professor Joseph Noel. Professor, I'll still need you to be on standby even as we start engaging the panel. To our participants, if you are not speaking, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted so that we can have a good conversation as we move along. On my panel, or rather on the panel, we have Nodumo Dlamini from the Association of African Universities, Fadahunsi Sefuni from the Oracle Academy, Magdalene Oduor from the Institute of Advanced Technology in Kenya, Nancy Soila from the Kenya University and College's Central Placement Service, and Matogoro Jabera from the Mozilla Foundation and University of Dodoma. I will go straight to the panel. One, just to seek their reflection on the perspectives that have been shared by Professor Noel. But most importantly, I have a specific question for each of the panelists just to set the scene. And my first question goes to Nodumo. Nodumo, do we have the necessary policy interventions that are needed for the deployment of digital infrastructure in higher education? You could share with us your perspective, especially because you're involved in the higher education sector through the Association of African Universities. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Barak. I hope I'm audible. Thank you also to Professor Joseph Noel for an excellent foundation to the discussion. I work for the Association of African Universities, and we bring over 400 universities together through a network for purposes of supporting the universities to do their business better. So we want to leverage the capacities that are resident in the different universities to improve African higher education. Concerning the issue of policies what we are seeing, for example, at a continental level, the policies are being put in place. I think maybe we need to investigate the effectiveness of the implementation of those policies. For example, the African Union recently launched the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, which covers the period of 2020 to 2030. And this is a follow-up to other ICT strategies that have been developed in the past. So the idea is that the African Union Commission sets the policy, and then the policies are adopted at a regional economic community level, like at the level of the East African Community, Southern African Development Community, ECOWAS in West Africa, and so on and so forth. So when we look at a policy like the current digital transformation strategy, in my view, it's adequate. And then at a national level, governments have also largely established national ICT strategies. It, of course, needs to be investigated how well those strategies speak to the issues that affect African higher education. One of the struggles that we have as African higher education institutions is the whole issue pertaining to quality broadband internet. And the challenges of connectivity in African countries, as we know, lie with the last mile issues. And the last mile is when high-speed internet reaches the rural areas that are most times not attractive business-wise to be connected. So we see that the first mile has largely been achieved. Most of the countries have access to connectivity, but the challenge is spreading it equitably to the different parts of the countries. So in a brief, Barack, the policies are there. The issues that we need to pay more attention to, how well are these policies taken up? How well are the policies being implemented? How well are the national ICT policies really addressing the issues that affect African higher education? And how are we organizing ourselves at a national level to sort of advocate for things to change? I remember in the morning, Sarah spoke about the National Research and Education Networks. And in our view, those are extremely important vehicles that we should use at a national level to ensure that higher education institutions are treated differently in terms of internet infrastructure and just being able to do their business better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nodrumo, for those important reflections that you have actually cast to just have us reflect on what needs to be done. And I totally agree that you are on point. We have very many good policies, but there is a challenge implementing the same and even mainstreaming them at national and at local level, just to make sure that we are able to improve our higher education sector. I will come back to you later, and I believe the floor also has many questions to you. I see a great conversation going on the chat box. Keep going. I also would like to encourage those that are able to tweet to keep tweeting. We will share our hashtag in the chat room so that we can invite as many participants to join the conversation as we move along. But at this point, I would like to invite Father Hunsi, and I have a question to him as well. As a private sector practitioner, what approaches should we use to deploy digital infrastructure in the education sector in a sustainable manner, following the conversation that Dumo has started? Father Hunsi, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and my greetings to everyone on the call and every person that has spoken, and the previous panelists and to the participants for actually joining, connecting, and still staying online. So if I got your question right, it's the question of, with my experience in the private sector, to advise how the sustainable approaches we can adopt to introduce digital literacy to our technical institutions. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. So in my knowledge so far, I would say the first thing is collaboration. I know that the first thing would be funding for a lot of people, but I would say collaboration. Collaboration because, first of all, that will be able to birth funding. Secondly, that will be able to birth the effective use of the existing infrastructure that we have. So infrastructure is not just laptops or computers. Infrastructure is access to power, access to space where you can even set up a classroom, access to internet connection, and a few other things, access to even security when you procure the infrastructure. So I would say that first thing is collaboration. Collaboration within all the stakeholders. I will start with the schools that we are speaking of, the tertiary institutions across Africa. So usually we have mostly concerns of infrastructure as per computer access, internet access, access to software for research, teaching, and learning. And let's start with the software. So most of the industry experts or the OEMs have access to they all have a program. For example, at Oracle Academy, we have Oracle Academy, where we support tertiary institutions and reach all schools, education sector, with every form of Oracle technology, but on a pedagogical format. So we make sure that our software is available for teachers to use for teaching, learning, and research across board. Now, when schools collaborate with such organizations, while you may have had to pay a huge amount for this, then request that, we don't want money from you, but our students are learning these topics theoretically, and we need them to have this access or this knowledge practically, so that when they graduate, they can actually also start from a good level where they're already giving technical support when they resume work. So, like I said, the typical thing is to ask for funding for digital infrastructure, but I do say that's not right. It's not every organization that will give you funding, but they might have something else for you. Maybe they may even be willing to fund your admin staff, or maybe they may be willing to fund the building or access to power to a building to power your laptop. So you get laptop from this one, get power from this one, get access to software from this one. So I would strongly say collaboration, public-private partnership, as they call it. But in our education sector, I strongly believe collaboration would help. Now, when it comes to sustainable because some schools have had to turn their IT departments to be commercial, so that they can also maintain the resources that they have in those centers. Now, I do not advise against this. I only advise for a sustainable approach, where you have some schools who offer services to the government with their infrastructure. So they either offer training or even offer what they call CBT testing with the center. That way they're able to generate funds, but not charging your students extra bill for them to have access to these resources that you may have gotten for free. Another challenge would be also the fact that data storage, which I know that a lot of schools also have either accessed funds like World Bank funding and the likes to either manage data centers and build in their schools. So I could go on and on with explanations, but in my own experience, I would say that when it comes to accessing digital infrastructure and sustaining it, we have to explore collaboration. But my key message here is to say, funding is not the only collaboration to request for. I always tell people that what we offer at Oracle Academy is like a buffet. When you get to the buffet table, pick what you want and you make use of it. There will be other offerings that may not pertain to you, and there might be other offerings that pertain to you but not at the time. Or you might also visit so many buffet tables from so many people willing to offer. But the first thing is identify your own model and your roadmap. Don't just collaborate with everything and everyone without necessarily defining how to use it. So I'll give you an example. If I'm a private sector owner and I've collaborated with an institution for over a period of 3 years because they attended my buffet table and they picked the software, and I check that in 3 years you have not used the software, I may be considering to cut you off from that program and give that same resource to another school that is interested. So what I'm saying is, even while we are collaborating, identify your model and your roadmap and collaborate based on that. As you expand, a good reputation is better than a reputation that says, oh, this school, when you give them, they never use it. If in 3 years you'll be ripe to use a cloud services, then apply for a cloud services grant from any of the institutions. So I would say collaboration is the key. However, please adopt models, strategies that would work for you. Funding is not the only thing to look for in collaboration. Well, funding is also applicable, and there are organizations that give that. But that would be my advice when it comes to implementing digital infrastructure across tertiary institutions for sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Hunsi. I like the example of buffet that you used. Unfortunately, in Africa, we are used to serving from the pot. So it could be the reason why we face many challenges because of the approach that we are using. But I think I'll come back to that as we think through this. I would like at this juncture to invite Magdalene Odwor. And my question to you, Magdalene, is how do we ensure that our higher education curriculum continuously evolves to meet the changing needs of the market?
All right. Thank you, Barak, for the opportunity to answer to that. First, let me respond or react to Professor Noel. Quite a good presentation there. And some of the issues that he raised, or some of the pointers that he was able to bring out that would enable education to move from 3.0 to 4.0 to even 5.0. I think we can all agree, based on his presentation, that for the African education system, depending with which level of education you're talking about, I think we are still at 3.0. Probably slowly we are moving to 4.0, and soon we can be able to move to 5.0. And some of the indicators that he talked about, for example, when it comes to testing of students, what are you testing, from the kind of examination and assessments that you're giving to students. And he mentioned something about cognitive skills, which is very, very important, especially not just for the technical programs, but all kinds of learning, because we want students to be able to come out and be able to be either employable or be able to offer solutions to issues that we have in the community. So if I'm talking about, let's say, computer science student, for example, they're not just learning about programming, okay? But within the programming, we're encouraging analytical skills and problem solving so that they can be able to identify the issues they have in the community, that they can be able to apply the skills they have learned in class on, and then be able to offer solutions back in their communities, and not just necessarily just, thinking about getting a job and probably just earning money. And that will come in when we we change right from our syllabuses, how we assess the kind of content we are giving to students, as well as the kind of assessments you're going to give to those particular students, so that we are continuously promoting critical thinking, problem solving, analytical skills as well, practical skills as well, that the students are encouraged to be able to have, even as they, as they are able to roll out of our institutions, as well as out of the higher learning education programs as well. Okay. So to my questions, kindly, Barak, just repeat that again. I was still reacting to Professor Noel, kindly.
Thank you, Magdalene. The question is, how do we ensure that our higher education curriculum continuously evolves to meet the changing market needs?
All right. There are a number of things we can be able to do to ensure that our curricula evolves to meet the current standards that we have in the industry. One of the things that we can be able to do, of course, in the morning I talked about the skills gaps that we have, not just among the students, but also among the trainers as well. So usually the lecturers are involved in the developing of the curricula, the outlines that are used in class, as well as the content. And one of the things that us as an institution we do is to ensure that when we get a curricula, for example, let's say it's CDAC, for example, or from a collaborating university, how do we translate this curricula or this syllabus into content that a lecturer can be able to use in class, and then from there be able to develop content that will be able to promote critical thinking, is able to promote problem solving skills that we're talking about, so that then the students we have are able to meet the current changing environment we have in the business, in the technical industry, or whatever application area they're going to go out into. So involving your lecturers and your trainers and continually capacity building them in these particular areas is very, very important. And they also must be involved in the developing of these particular tools that they can be able to use in class. So assuming you're developing a tool for a particular unit, then what you want to do, apart from if you have, for example, a instructional research and development team in your institution, then you want to bring in a particular lecturer as well to be involved. So that way, then they are able to give in their input in a way that the curricula can be able to continually be relevant for the student and be relevant in the industry as well. Another thing that we can be able to incorporate is to be able to have industry players either, and I've seen this in certain institutions here in Kenya, whereby the industry players are brought in either through regular seminars or as part of teaching staff within the faculties. Of course, as we bring in them up as part of teaching staff, they'll be able to understand, they should be able to understand the methodology of delivery in class and why exactly they're coming to be part of the students. So this industry player who's coming in either to offer a seminar or to be able to be part of your teaching staff, then they'll be able to interact with your syllabus or with your curricula as well. So it means as they use your curricula in terms of delivery, they're able to either give add-ons or be able to pinpoint some of the things that can be added or can be changed. Of course, you can involve them even as early as during when you're developing the curricula. But also one thing I've seen work is involving them either in the teaching or in having regular seminars with the students in specific thematic areas is very, very important. So that then they're able to give in their input that is relevant to the industry, as well as giving a benefit to the students. So you don't have students who are graduating and they're wondering, what am I going to do with my degree? I can't be able to even, be innovative or be able to start, my own, have a startup on my own. Why? Because such kind of skills were not developed earlier. So then if you have these industry players being involved, then they can be able, to prepare students better through the use of the syllabus that is continually changing and continually aware of the environmental changes that are happening in the education sector as well as in the industry. Thank you, Barak.
Thank you very much for that wonderful intervention, Magdalene. I'm sure there's plenty of feedback that we'll get from the conversation. I'll be handing over the floor to the audience shortly after the next two interventions. One of our panelists, Nancy, is having a bit of connectivity challenge joining, which is one of the issues that we are seeking to address through this conference. Next, we'll have Matogoro Jabera from the University of Dodoma. And my question to you, Matogoro, there's an issue that Professor Joseph Knoll has raised, which touches on community involvement. As a community network practitioner, how do we involve the community-based organizations in ownership and deployment of digital infrastructure that is necessary for advancing us to the next level of education? To quote Professor Knoll, maybe education 4.0. Matogoro, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Barak, and thank you so much, Professor Noah, for a very good presentation. And I also appreciate feedback from other panelists. And I would appreciate to contribute on the issue of community engagement. And maybe before I speak much on how community can be engaged, I would like to bring a very short experience from my involvement to community network initiatives. When I started the first community network in Tanzania called Kondoa Community Network using the television white space technology, we opted the NGO approach, non-government organization, where members or community members in a given location come together under the umbrella of NGO and then start establishing community network that meets or that address the connectivity challenge in their location. But when we assessed the level of community engagement and the level of ownership, because in Tanzania, if you have a non-government organization, okay, so in Tanzania, if you have a non-government organization, you just have founding members, and then you go through the process, and then you register with the Ministry of Health and Community Development, and thereafter, then you are done. So you can start implementing your project or your initiative. But when we try to assess how ownership has been achieved, we noted that there is a challenge. So after that, we opted on the use of what we call the cooperative approach. In the cooperative approach, community members, they have to join to the cooperative by buying the shares, so they become shareholders, and also they pay what we call the entry fee. So through this, it's a kind of a very minimal kind of contribution, which also make them to be committed and making a sustainable movement in their location. I have found that the cooperative approach has worked very well, and I'm asked to report that we now have about 4 community networks which are now registered under the new approach of the cooperative approach. So maybe on top of community engagement on digital infrastructure, dear participants, panelists, and speakers, we can say that connectivity in Africa is faced with around 5 key challenges. The first challenge is high cost on backhauling solution. The second is on the issue of the lack of last mile infrastructure. The second or third one we can say in some location there are high cost or high fee for the co-location infrastructure. So in case you are co-locating your infrastructure to the telecom or mobile network operators, then you find there are a lot of costs which are associated with that. And the fourth one is on the issue of digital retrace. And maybe the fifth one on the order we can say is the issue of what we call the power. Some location there is also power solution or power challenges. So in order for community to be engaged, the first thing you should try your best to make sure that community members own the idea. So ownership should be ownership of the community network or digital infrastructure should start within the community members. It should not be something like someone from outside or the foreigners or someone from someone from town coming up with a solution. My friend, I should tell you that if you opt to that option, then once you deploy the infrastructure, digital infrastructure, once you go back to town, then I find there is no finality afterwards. So what I should comment, because we are going to address the issue that try to examine relevant policies that would be a critical intervention to support uptake of innovation in higher learning education, because higher learning education have three core activities. The first one is teaching, which we perform it very well. The second one is about research. The research components, higher education are doing it very well, but maybe we call the use of utilization of the finding to the community to reflect what has been researched is still a challenge. You have seen one of the panelists has addressed that. So the third one is on the public services, where we do the thing on the community, so that we can also reflect what we are doing in the higher learning institution. So you may find most of our learning institutions concentrate much on teaching, and very less on the other two core activities, which is the public services as well as research components. So to wind up on the discussion on community engagement toward digital infrastructure, I should declare that so far, as others have mentioned, I see that we have everything, but we still face two main challenges. In my simple language, I call it, we still have the challenge on 2P. 2P is we still have a challenge on people. We still have challenge on policies. So, for example, on community network in Africa, only a few countries recognize or have policies in place that recognize the community network approach. And in Africa, to say it clear, very few countries have policies that favor the use of a modern technology, like television and white space technology, which existed some years back. But South Africa and a few countries in Africa have the policy that favor that. So it's the same case in higher learning education, where the speed of the updates of the curriculum to meet the change of technology is going very slow, especially in Africa. So as I mentioned, community engagement, especially on digital infrastructure, the genesis of the idea should start from the community. So if you are trying to do an intervention, try first to do a number of sensitization and awareness, so that community members can buy the idea and take the idea forward for the sustainability. And when we talk on the issue of sustainability, we should focus on 4 sustainability approaches. One is technical sustainability. Second is financial sustainability, but also you should also be able to sustain the project in terms of human resource and other sustainability model like economic and financials, as I have mentioned. So it's very important to get, and I have seen, then you are assured with the community engagement and the ownership, because people are part of the community network, and they are also concerned with the digital infrastructure that have been put in place, because they have also invested. They have also become shareholders with this solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Matogoro, for that interesting intervention. Last but not least, I will turn to Nancy, who has already joined us. Nancy works for the Kenya University and Colleges Central Placement Service that is responsible for student placement in various universities, which I believe is something that most of our nations in Africa have. My question to you, Nancy, is what approaches can we use for placement of students in virtual universities? I have seen issues being raised, especially on how to handle the underserved, how to handle probably the disabled who may not necessarily be able to join the traditional university setup. So what approaches can we use for placement of students in virtual universities? You have the floor, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you and good afternoon to you all. So this afternoon, thank you. In the morning, I had some challenges. I was equally multitasking, sorry for that. But now when you come to placement, as the moderator has said, we do place students to universities and colleges. I was able to follow part of the morning session, and I had a question that came about the TVET, the TVET sector. And so we do place to both universities and colleges. And basically how we do this, our services are online, fully online, whereby even with the issues of the pandemic, our services were like usual, because normally how we do it, a student is able to start and end while still at home or from the comfort of their, wherever they are applying from. And basically, once we place to these institutions, our function or our mandate ends at placing the students. But before placement, we also do career guidance to these students. And then after placement, then we leave it to the institutions to now give instruction to students on what module they'll use, whether it is virtual, whether it is a classroom or lecture theater, and whether it is on whichever campus and all that. So when placing these students, we ask the institutions to give us the programs we are placing into, and also the numbers to place. And then after we validate, we ensure that we are placing students to validated programs, then we place to this institution. All along my schooling and even today in Kenya, I have heard of this module we refer to as virtual learning, open learning, distance learning. But the question we would ask ourselves here is, because when now pandemic came in, it was like we went the way of closing the schools. So I was also asking myself, we've been having the virtual learning, the distant learning, and the assumption here would be that these are people who are using internet and all those available infrastructure, and they could start their classes, they could start a course and end the course and even graduate. But now when it came to pandemic, we all had to go home, stay at home, no schooling. And that is when now we are having like a wake-up call. We are having workshops, we are having forums, we are having meetings to think on how we can offer this training, or we can facilitate the training virtually. This is when now we are starting to think of having like centers of excellence for like TVET training, because I think at TVET it is more of a challenge because mostly we have technical skills, unlike where we have soft skills. Because if our organization was a training institution, it would be basically on the soft side of it, because you apply, we process, and then you get the feedback. But think of a class where you're doing engineering, you're doing anything technical, then that now poses a challenge on how do you start, where do you start, and how do you end? So basically, I would say that the placement service, now that it's a stakeholder in higher education, this is the time I'm seeing the COOPs being invited in forums where we are discussing on going forward. And I think mostly the most affected part of it is the technical part of it, where we have practicals, where we have exams. And I'm imagining, because like, for example, on the TVET side, the thinking is, or what he's selling is that we need to come up with centers of excellence. So it is like maybe with time we'll have each institution having a department or a directorate or a section operating as a center of excellence. If virtual learning can only take place where we have a center of excellence, then this is the time now going forward, we may have this in each and every institution. But as at today, I am sure there is virtual learning that takes place. But if we were now to assess, or we were now to revisit and see what is this that was going on virtually, then this would come out clearly that only the soft part of it was being conducted virtually. But when it comes to practice, and that is why there was so much noise when it comes to like student pursuing things like medicine, the question would be, how do I do the practicals online and the likes? So our moderator, what I would say here is that this is the time that we are very busy with sittings and forums and meetings where we're discussing going forward, how can we also do what we've been doing in class or in a lecture theater or in a lab, but do it virtually. But on our side with placement, we do get the we get the programs, we get the capacities from institutions, we get the results of the students, and then we place these students to these institutions, and then we leave the institution now to give the joining and the learning instruction to the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for that interesting perspective on student placement. At this moment, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience, and I will take the 5 questions. The first 5 questions, let me just indicate that you raise your hand and you specify who the question is directed to on the panel, so that we can have feedback to your question or concern. I'm looking at the audience just to see who has raised their hand at this time. Is that Mobolaji?
Yes, Mobolaji.
All right.
From Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria. I want to appreciate all our panel and the moderator for this wonderful session, and I've been enjoying the program. My question is, we are talking of collaboration, access to computer, internet, public and private partnership, and many other things. But we in Africa, we still have the problem of funding. We still have poverty. We still have some of these students that don't have access to internet, to computer. Some of them live in remote area where there are shortage of electricity, like Nigeria. So my question now is, can we collaborate on getting external funding for universities, for centers, for research institutes, so that e-learning and blended learning will be much more easier? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mobolaji, for that question. I don't think it has been directed to any particular panelist, but probably I can, I'll start with Professor Noll, just to give us his perspective based on experience on the question that is being raised by Mobolaji.
Yeah, you know, wherever I go, I always hear the argument of funding, and of course, funding is a real argument. The question which I'm always asking myself is, we have seen so many infrastructure developments which never got through because the ecosystem isn't in place. So the approach which I suggest is always to empower the community, as Nancy does with her centers of excellence, as Matagoro does through his community network, as Barak and Robert have shown for CIS. So I think for me, knowledge is the first step, because knowledge can actually result in the demand of the connectivity you need.
Thank you very much, Professor No.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nodumo, do you have any response to that particular question?
I also strongly believe that money follows good ideas. I think we need to show what we can do. And then once we show what we can do, I think the money issues would be resolved. And also, even at a national level, we really need to do lobbying through by showing. Yes, it's a big issue, so I think we need to be strategic and not move around with a begging bowl, but rather organize ourselves to do small things. So what AHERI is doing is an excellent example of that. Creating this platform and then bringing people together. We are showing that we can organize ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that important piece of wisdom that money follows good ideas. I think that's what a way to really give a short and sweet answer to the question.
Yeah, maybe Balak, this is Matogoro.
Yes, please.
I can have a feeling of the situation Mubarak is going through. And, you know, when I also started the movement for community network, I was like, if I have money, then I can do this. But sometimes you can have money and the community is not ready for the solution you're trying to suggest to them. So I understand Moboroj, the situation you're going through, and the question we have asked is for the betterment of all participants who are attending the session. But I also mentor some of the innovators in one of the innovation space. And what I normally recommend is first start with an idea and then put a strategy to implement the idea. And funding could be maybe third or fourth or fifth item on the execution of the idea. So it's very important that in most African communities, for example, yesterday I visited one of the, of course, it's my village, it's my home village. And in this village, if you never visited them, you can find that maybe people are very comfortable with the challenges and difficulties they're going through, especially the connectivity. Because in my village, I cannot make a Skype call unless I travel 20 kilometers to find a stable 3G connection. You can imagine. But when we were doing the sensitization, people started speaking. These are the laymen, our mothers, our grandmothers, our grandfathers. They said, you know, I never knew that internet work under different speed or different kind of support than voice. Because for them, they thought having a voice, then you are done. But the challenge came when their children went back to their community. They normally tell them that there is no
no connectivity. So they were wondering. So when I introduced them on the issue of a community network in my village, people were like, this solution could have been here maybe 10 years back. Because when we want to see results for children, we have to travel that 20 kilometers just to access the internet. So all these hassles, in other areas, people are getting access to internet while they are sitting on bed. But in other locations, people have to travel 20 kilometers just to access internet connectivity. This is not fair. So we have to start with an idea. We put strategy, implementation strategy in place. Then from there, we come finding out. We can even identify partners because it's not necessary to have funding like money in place. But for example, Professor Joseph and through Basic Internet Foundation, they have some very good equipment because which is a very good entry point for connectivity. So it's not necessary that Professor Noe will give you maybe $20,000, but he can give you like 2 or 3 devices for connectivity. And from there, you move forward. So I think that's what I can recommend for this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matogoro. Before I come to my other panelists on the same question, I see Sarah has raised her hand. Sarah, you have the floor. You can direct your question or make your comment to any of the panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I have a question still around funding and infrastructure. Are there low-cost infrastructure deployment examples that the panelists can share? And is there an opportunity for higher education to partner with community networks, or actually have these partnerships already been happening? Maybe the panelists can share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think it seems that question can be answered by Professor Noel and Matogoro. I'll start with Professor Noel because Matogoro has just spoken. But after them, I will also come to Father Hutsi to respond to the same. So Professor Noel, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll try to make it short. Partnership is the one and only issue. So I liked a lot how Nancy described the transition from meeting people towards the need for centers of excellence to actually bring people together. For us, it has been the starting point number one to bring people together and have the same kind of opinion. And then from there on emerge. And we were quite happy because the government of Norway has actually adapted a lot of our inputs and made it to a governmental statement, as you have seen. So I think we are on the right way, but it's really, how can we make this global movement so that everyone joins us and actually pushes towards becoming part of the community for meaningful access to information and internet for everyone.
Thank you so much, moderator and the panelists. The question that I wanted to ask, basically, if you look at Kenya, yeah, there's a body that is coming up, it is still very new, and that is a Kenya Qualifications Authority, if I'm not wrong. And it has got several mandates, but one of the mandates, and the reason why I'm asking this is we were also, the panelists were sharing about the policies that kind of have influence or bearing on higher education learning. So this policy kind of targets the jua kali sector. The jua kali sector in Kenya are basically those people who gain skill on the work. Others might have not gone even to the formal school or kind of education, but they have got skills learned from places of work through apprenticeship. And so these people are to be given qualification. The body is supposed to assess and give them qualifications, give them certificates based on the skills that they have, so that it can be matched and be equated to those who go through formal education like universities up front. So my question comes like this. what will be the take of the panelists on this, on formal kind of education? Is it going to strengthen? Is it going to add value? Is it going to, which scenario are you picking from this kind of approach that Kenya is kind of picking up?
Thank you very much, Dr. Collins Odoyo, for raising that important question. I want to move to Fatahunsi. I think a number of questions have been raised. I don't know whether you have a reaction to any of them so that we can also get perspectives from the other panelists that have not spoken. After Fatahunsi, I will come to Magdalene and then Nancy as well. Feel free to choose any of the questions that have been raised. Fatahunsi?
Okay, thank you. I think I will just more like sum everything up. So regarding the issue of funding and known cases, I would say that there's been instances where private organizations like us sponsor. I know that at Oracle, we have a sustainability program where we give grants to 4 sectors: education, health, environment, and technology, where we give grants. And there are other organizations that give grants. I'm aware that there is a World Bank grant that is focused on education for all the African countries. I know that there are programs from Africa Union, African Development Bank, and they give financial funding. I also do know that there are some projects that I've experienced in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Kenya. So the instance in Nigeria was with Lagos State, where they started a project called Code Lagos, and the Code Lagos project invited private partners to set up computer labs in select schools and also supported our curriculum. So the teachers were taught, the students had access to computer for the period of, I think, 1 year to 3 years, based on the agreement. Also in Cote d'Ivoire, Oracle partnered with the Ministry of National Education on the project, and they also brought in the United States Embassy on that project. So Oracle was supporting with curriculum, software, and knowledge transfer, but they needed locations that had access to internet for teacher training. What they did was there were American corners in almost every city. Yamoussoukro, San Pedro, everywhere in Cote d'Ivoire had a United States American corner that had access to computers, everything. So they leveraged on that partnership where it was Ministry of National Education, Oracle, and US Embassy collaborated, and that solution was solved. I also know that Kenya also had something where we partner with Global Peace, and to deliver, we worked with Semastia. Semastia already had funding from the Ministry of Education, and Semastia has a center that has access to computers. So that was a way that, you know, without money, that problem was still solved. And like I said, and like someone said rightly, that when there is a good idea, money will follow it. And a lot of organizations, what we look for is a sustainable project that can stand its test of time, and also look at how you plan to sustain all your contribution. Usually you submit application for grants and there is no input from your institution to the grant. That's a red flag to say you don't want to take ownership. But if you say the institution will do XYZ or cater to XYZ or administratively cater this, we need funding for this. It shows that there is contributory responsibility towards the project, and that is a key way to access grants from any organization. I think that would be my feedback.
Thank you very much for that input, Fatahunsi. Magdalene, do you have any response to the questions that have been raised by the speakers?
Thank you, Barak. Yes, I do. And I want to react to the issue of funding. I know there's been the talk that if you have a good idea, that money should be able to follow that. I also want to say that education in itself is already a good idea, so money should follow it. And not just in the specific innovative either topics by students or by a community, but education is very key to the development agenda of not just Kenya or Africa, but the entire world. And in funding, I know for most of the times we talk about either bigger corporations or organizations coming in to fund. Right now we're talking about inequitable internet access. Either students do not have the proper gadgets, internet is expensive, So you have the mobile provider, for example, coming to subsidize. You've seen Safaricom do that for university students, so that with your registration number, for example, then you can be able to get, some MBs for free, or you can be able to access cheaper internet at a subsidized cost. But I want to throw this question back to us. For those who are not in Kenya, in the Kenyan aspect, we have this idea of coming together when something is needed in the community, and we give whatever little we have to eat and to ensure that this can be able to be done. We see it when somebody is sick and we need to be able to settle hospital bill and they don't have health insurance, for example, they cannot be able to afford it. Somebody has died, their funeral expenses, we come in, we are able to chip in and are able to support the family. Why can't we do the same for education as well? Especially right now in the, let me not call it post-COVID or during the COVID period, we've seen how technology has played a very key role, but the inequalities that we have seen, and it is very, very sad. Some of the things I've experienced with students who've been learning online and doing exams is there are students who totally could not. And it did cause either they're being sponsored by a particular organization that does not take care of internet costs, for example. They only pay for tuition, and their parents cannot be able to afford, for them to have internet and good connectivity for them to do online classes and be able to sit for their exams. So these students missed the completion of their January, April semester, for example. And so as we have universities opening back up this particular week in Kenya for having the fourth years, for example, the graduating class to finish, some of them actually will not be able to do that. So as a community, and we saw that when Sally mentioned what they're doing in South Africa, they're asking the community, you may not have a child in university or in college, for example, or even primary and secondary, but we need to support each other so that they can be able to access either online education or be able to access any other gadgets that they need, for example, to continue with learning. So maybe we need to be able to have a culture whereby we also donate. We do not wait for either some European countries or some other outside donor to be able to come and fund our education. I know usually the discussion would be, or the argument would be, we've already paid tax, education is the responsibility of the government, and I'm paying tax, and we've seen how corruption cases has come in, so some people are thinking, it's already, they're wasting resources from my tax, why should I give again for education? But maybe we need to rethink this, so that as a community, we get engaged in education of our children, as a parent, either as a guardian, for example. Why not, donate to that particular school, for example? Yes, we have free primary school or free secondary school, or when students are going to university, they are placed by the central placement, as we've seen, for example, they'll be given some funding, for example, loan by the HELB. Why can't we be able to support institutions so that they can be able, communities, so that they can be able to have the infrastructure that they need to be able to continue to offer quality education? Thank you, Barak.
Thank you very much, Magdalene, for that intervention. Nancy, would you like to make any remarks before I come back to each of the panelists for closing remarks? And before Nancy speaks, we are coming to the tail end of the conversation. Gordon is going to give closing remarks. And after Gordon speaks, I would request that each of the participants turns on their camera. We'll have a group photograph. So make sure that you are in a good environment so that you can wave at us. We take a group photo at the end of the meeting. I'm just preparing you in case you need to switch cameras or you need to be at a favorite spot, maybe where there is a garden. With that, I want to invite Nancy to give her comments, and then I'll come back to the panelists for their parting shot.
Okay, thank you, our moderator. I hope you can be able to hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So I will start with the question that was directed to Nancy. This question is asking for those students who stay in a place which have poor connectivity, how you used to help them on accessing learning materials. Thank you for the question. And yes, this is something we are experiencing, but before I continue, I want to correct the tail end of the question that is talking about accessing learning materials. by saying that we do not share learning materials with students, because once we place them to their respective universities and colleges, now on learning materials, they get them from the institution. But on the other hand, because as I said that our services are online, they're fully automated, we also have a challenge with the students or applicants who come from very remote areas or areas with poor connectivity. But what we've tried to do is to ensure that we have provided different platforms where applicants can be able to access our services. Like we even have a mobile app. Then again, we also have now the system, the online application system, some services that do not require huge amount of information. We use the messaging and the USSD services. So we like have provided a mix of many platforms so that we can try to reach as much. But by the end of the day, you will not miss quite a handful of the applicants who will come saying, I come from a very remote area, I could not be able to access. So to help those ones out, we also use the institutions as our centers, whereby we ask this applicant that you can visit an institution, whether a university or a college that is near home or near where you come from. And we have facilitated these institutions that they can support the student to access our platform and apply for the services. So, and then as one of the presenter in the morning said that there is need also for culture change. You'll find people who even come from where neighboring where the providers are, but will still come to the office and will be like, I want to sit with you so that you do this for me. This is not because of poor connectivity, but I think it's kind of a culture that we need some kind of 360 degrees change, where we need to change the culture first. We need to sensitize people. We need to involve them so much. We need their buying in so that they can accept this, then they can be willing. Because from the willingness, then they can, they do not have, there are those people who believe that for them to get your service, they have to see you face by face, to an extent of they want to sit with you so that you do it for them. So we are aware of all that because we've done this for long. We've been doing our services online for quite a number of years, and every day is a learning day. We learn by every concern that we receive from our clients, and we work towards improving this. What I believe when we start talking ICT matters, it's like we have the manpower. The expertise are there, because like in our organization, most of the services are homemade. We have an ICT department that any service we want to offer, any new thing, for example, with the COVID, even those things that we were doing physically, like career guidance, we used to go to school, put them in a dining hall, take them through a 4-hour session. But between then, that was around March, and now we have even come up with a career expert system, whereby we are rolling it out. A student can sit down, log in, and will be taken through, including personality test and all that. All what we were doing physically can be done. So it's not about maybe the expertise and manpower, but it's about the culture change of these people who believe they have to come to and sit with you. I want to make it short because I know time has really gone. But before I mute, I would wish to just talk about the KNQA. Someone asked about this body, and I am going to put a disclaimer that when I'm talking about the KNQA, I'm not part of it, but I'm part of the government. And you know, the government, these are different extensions whereby, like for us to facilitate our service, we work with other bodies of the government. Like we work with NEC to get the results. We work with CUE for accreditation. We work with TVETA, we work with institutions, we work with everyone. We also work with KNQA because KNQA is supposed to come up with KNQA stands for Kenya National Qualification Authority, which has come up with the Kenya National Qualification Framework. This framework, it has put it in levels because in future we are going to use their framework to place students. That is why I have some little understanding of this framework, whereby in this framework, they have put this qualification in levels, all the way to from level 1 going up, whereby because of this small level or lower levels, that is where we are having even experiences from informal experiences that you have had, taking care of animals, cleaning dishes, plaiting hairs without having gone to school count. As you go up the framework, you find that at level 3, that is where now, or at level 4, that is where now you start finding qualification that may require a certificate like artisan. You go to level 5, you find that is where we have the craft certificate. Level 6, you find that is diploma. Level 7 is degree, going up there. Meaning at some point, we may not lose, or we will not lose the formal education, because I'm imagining for it to qualify to be a diploma, for it to qualify to be a degree at level 7, then you must have had done some contact unit. They give the numbers of units, the number of hours, the assessment and all that. So we will not lose the formal, but I am seeing it as a plus, so that we do not leave behind the disadvantage. It would be like another way of having an affirmative action. This is also, we also have another body known as the CDAC that is coming up with the curriculum and assessment. And with CDAC, unlike some other examination body where they test you or they examine you for a diploma or a certificate, these are people who will, from a qualification, say a diploma in fashion and design or beauty and hairdressing, they will train you and even assess you for one unit, say like makeups, and you will qualify for that, get a certificate, and you can go out and earn a living from makeups only with a certificate for the same. So thank you so much, and I feel there is much more to be done, and COVID came up with a wake-up call to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for those interesting comments. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring this panel to a close. We will have a summation of what we've been discussing since morning. But before that, I would like to give each of my panelists an opportunity to give their parting shot. I believe they have done justice to the subject, and I will start with Professor Joseph Knoll, who actually kickstarted the conversation with a presentation, and then we will have the other panelists as listed on the agenda. Professor Knoll, your parting shot?
Thanks, Barak, and thanks for giving me so much speaker time. You know, giving speaking time to a professor is always a chaos. Now, I'd like to summarize by, first of all, thanks. Second, by inviting you to actually what Nancy said. Online access gives us the power to change culture and to demand our rights and to demand the education which is actually necessary to get a decent job and to bring our societies further. A short comment to Sifunmi. When you talked about the World Bank, I still try to convince them that, you know, not everything what we are out is $1 billion affair. Because I look at what ITU is doing, what UNICEF is doing with the project Giga, where they said it costs billions to connect schools. Barak and his team have shown that building infospots is a relatively low cost investment to bring digital out. And that is the message which I want to bring out also to Lina, answering that empowering the communities is a first step to really get advances. And I stop here in the interest of time. Thanks.
Thank you very much for being brief and to the point. Nodumo, your parting shot?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. I think because we all know that before COVID, our education system was already challenged. We can't run away from addressing the issues of infrastructure and making sure we take into consideration equity, access, and gender issues. With the community network that I'm familiar with in Kenya, in Lanet Moja, that community network has partnered very smartly with KENET. KENET is the National Research and Education Network in Kenya. So I think one of the key takeaway messages is that for community networks, we really need to strengthen them to partner effectively. And then lastly, institutions like ours, the Association of African Universities, we will continue to play our advocacy role as the voice for higher education in Africa, because I think that is very much needed, either to address issues of capacity, issues of infrastructure, shining the light on what African educational institutions are doing, because there's a lot that is going on, but maybe people don't know in terms of what exactly to latch on, to learn from, or to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that powerful summary, Nodumo, and for the great work that you're doing at the Association of African Universities. Indeed, your input has been very useful. Father Hunsi, your parting shot?
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here. And just like everyone has said and emphasized, we do know that the education sector in our countries need a boost. We know that we can identify so many reasons, so many type of boosts that we need. We talk about educator training, mindset change, stakeholder engagement, funding, infrastructure. But I believe that the lasting solution that we can do is to ensure that everybody feels responsible towards this particular endeavor. My personal belief is the fact that education, formal and informal, is the solution to poverty and unemployment across our countries. And since we all know this, and since we know that there are different problems and different solutions, it starts with us. Let us first understand that we have to feel and know that we are responsible towards this, so that when decisions are being made and we are consulted or there's a contribution, we are making it knowing that this problem, when solved, will bring a good change to everyone, including yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that precise summation of the important issues as captured from your perspective. Magdalene?
All right, thank you, Barak. So let me have a parting shot based on the question that you raised for me, on especially ensuring that our curricula keep in touch with the changing environment that we have either in the work industry, in the communities, etc. And I must say that as Kenya, we have really made strides. Nancy has just talked about some of the organizations that right now we are starting to see them being really active. For example, the KNQA, for example, in ensuring that curriculums that are developed by institutions meet certain standards and requirements, so that then we can be able to map students right from the basic level and nobody is left out. So some form of inclusivity up to the PhD level. And I encourage anybody who's involved in the education, for example, to look at some of these documents by KNQA. We have, for example, a CDAC that deals with the TVET organizations. Again, they're about to roll out new syllabuses and curricula that are supposed to be very industry friendly and be able to release graduates as well as at any level that can be able to respond to challenges we have in the community that we have in Kenya and beyond. So yes, there are still gaps we have between curricula, content, and assessment in the country and probably other countries as well. But then we have organizations that are coming up and that are now actually developing policies and standardization, whereby you don't just wake up and have your curricula that is not, standardized, that doesn't go through quality assurance, so that then we are able that you're protecting the students that are enrolling into our institutions, and we're giving them content as well as programs that are relevant to the current situations we have in the country. Thank you, Barak.
Thank you for that great summation of the key issues, especially from the question that was raised to you, Magdalene. Nancy, your parting shots before we come to Matogoro.
Thank you, our moderator. Maybe in very few words, what I would say is that first of all, by saying this is a very good initiative of bringing all these people together. We've learned so much. As much as we've shared what we have, we've learned so much. And I think this is the way to go, because we need different stakeholders, each and every one of us holding his or her stake, so that we can have the country, or we can have Africa, we can have the whole world moving. And that in case of occurrences that what we experienced the other day, then we do not find ourselves in a halt. So such an initiative by AHERI of bringing people together, that's bringing ideas together. And I like the discussion that was saying, let's start with the ideas, let looking for fun be number 5 or number second last up there. Then, and because no one can be a preserve of all knowledge, bringing knowledge together or bringing ideas together is a very good initiative. Thank you.
Thank you for winding up with those words of wisdom. Indeed, the clarion call for AHERI, which I would like to remind us, is ideas into action. And we believe that the issues we've discussed will not just end on a paper, but by the time we have the next conference, we will actually have practical interventions that will help move the higher education sector to the next level. Matogoro, your closing remarks? It seems Matogoro might be having connectivity challenges. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to now invite Mr. Gordon Obonyo, who is an associate of Africa Higher Education Research Institute, to give us a summation of the issues that we have discussed since morning, even as I thank my panelists led by Professor Noor, who opened the floor with a presentation on digital infrastructures and education, Nodulmo Lamini from the Association of African Universities, Fadahunsi Sefunmi from Oracle Academy, Magdalene Oduor from the Institute of Advanced Technology in Kenya, Nancy Soila from the Kenya University and Colleges Central Placement Service, and Matogoro Jabera from the Mozilla Foundation and also the University of Dodoma, for those interesting insights that have really opened our mind this afternoon. Gordon, you have the floor to give your concluding, or rather to give us a summation of what we've discussed. And after that, please prepare for the group photo. Make sure that the camera captures you well, and then we complete the session. Gordon?
Okay, good. Great session, everyone. How's everyone? It's been a very interesting discussion today. And I'm also working from home, right in my village, but really connected. It is a challenge that this is what we are experiencing in most parts of Africa. Connectivity is an issue. But from the discussions that we've had today, if you look at what Professor Chacha talked about, then we realize that even in higher education, we have to think of how do we actually deploy ICT tools in delivering our academic profiles to greater content. And one of the major drivers that what has been heavily discussed today is the policy issues. There are quite a number of policy issues that are left hanging. And that means that maybe in Kenyan context, we could drive it at a bigger step. But with other countries, it means that we have to engage our governments. Thanks, at least today we've talked to the Commission for Higher Education, because these are policy issues that have to be driven for us to actually drive ICT, and because ICT actually is a key driver for innovation. So I think from that discussion, it's very clear that we have to think of how do we actually engage our legislation system so that we can actually review a number of policies, because it is true that we cannot deliver our academic profiles using the traditional methods, but it means post-COVID, we have to look at how do we continue, how should learning continue to happen in higher education, and that means how do we...
Boca. Vamos Boca, papá, vamos Boca.
Okay. Yeah, so that is a key driver that I think we have to engage, and I think there are a number of stakeholders like Nancy that I think would help us also to drive some of these issues upwards, and a number of stakeholders that are actually involved in Kenya. For other countries, I think we have the message of policy because it's a key thing. So I think it's part of this community should help us to drive these policy issues into a bigger context, because already this is a community, it would grow with time. And that means that the more numbers we have in the community, the bigger the force for us to actually influence decisions being done at a greater level within our countries. From another discussion, we are looking at issues of infrastructure. And I'm giving an example of today. I'm connected from my village in Western Kenya. And it is true that we cannot talk about innovation if infrastructure-wise we are still not, governments have not invested into it, or private sector players have not invested into the infrastructure. For example, where I am today, I have to use my mobile Wi-Fi to connect. A number of people have never seen that happen. They are used to going those 20 kilometers somebody was talking about to access connectivity. So it means that part of the policy issues, how do we actually extend the infrastructure, what we have, to a greater extent? For example, in fiber connectivity, in Kenya, there are a number of counties, how we are structured politically and economically and whatever. It means that sometimes us being as the stakeholders, we have to actually review a lot of CIDPs in the county level for us to drive infrastructure. That is at the county level in Kenya. For example, in Kisumu County, where AHERI is based, in Nairobi or any other town, we are able to engage the county management so that we can actually drive the issues of infrastructure and actually engage the network operators, because they are the key guys and the telcos who are behind the infrastructure. So it is true that from today we are coming up and we are agreeing that infrastructure is a key thing for us to achieve connectivity. If we look at the videos and from the evidence of what we've done with Basic Internet Foundation, it's clear that digital villages would actually drive digital literacy over a period of time. And from the comments that we've had here and there, it means that somehow, if government may not be able to invest into it, or develop agencies may not invest into it, it means there are also other private sector players that should see the money behind the idea, what we've been discussing today in the afternoon, that money would follow the ideas. So it means that digital literacy over a period of time has to be private sector led. That means that a number of us who are in the private sector space must see or should see the need to invest in them. Because even as we think of higher education, look at it that some of the universities today have actually invested in public Wi-Fi. And that is actually helping a number of students to do research. But quite a number of these universities have also not seen the need to invest because they could be saying we don't have funding and the rest. And so there's a need that for us to engage, then the private sector space has to see they have to see the space that is the gap that we have. For example, in higher education, that if we were to invest in a public Wi-Fi for the institution, what is the return on investment? And so I think digital literacy is a process and is something that we have to look at. How do we continually invest? How do we continually engage government as a regulator? How do we continually engage private sector players to invest and put their money into it? How do we continually engage other donor, other development agencies like UNICEF, who's interested in education? Professor Noel said it's not a billion-dollar question. That's the truth. But when people sit on the table and we're able to showcase and put our facts right, then it means we're able to actually push that space and we achieve some kind of percentage of digital literacy. I think over a period of time, maybe in AHERI, if time will allow, sometimes later, we can do a study on what is the extent of digital literacy in, for example, a few number of counties or universities, because it's a key area that maybe somebody might be interested in at some point. So I think that is it. I want to look at what we discussed. So I was looking at digital literacy. I want to look at innovation, because innovation has a lot of. We are discussing today that there are quite a number of skills which are actually being churned out, for example, in Kenya through the TVETs. And it is true that from what Nancy was saying today, that now most of these platforms, they're engaging students on an online, using the online platforms. Now we're looking at innovation. How do we encourage more people to adopt some of these online platforms? And how do we encourage them to actually look for innovative ways of engaging with all these institutions? And it is true that as we look forward to the days ahead, post-COVID and post this conference, it means that key players, we have to look at how do we structure our levels of engagement with the institutions, and how do we create innovative spaces. Currently in Kenya, we have a number of tech hubs that have come up, a number of, just like only one in Kisumu, and quite a number in Nairobi. The ones in Nairobi are emerging, and we have all these things that are coming up. So we are looking at innovation. So how do we actually invest in these tech hubs? I don't know the space in Nigeria, how it is like. I don't know how in South Africa is like. I don't know how it is in Uganda. But it means that somehow as a community, we have to look at innovation in that space. That technology will drive innovation, and that's what is happening today. But there has to be a space that we have to create for us to engage, and that's some of these spaces have to be actually created by institutions of higher learning, and that is a key thing that for us, out of the discussions that we've had today, it is key that we look at that. As Professor Noel said today, that really education, the model of delivering education has to change over a period of time. And in his presentation, it is very clear that as key stakeholders in higher education, we have to really look at, if we sit in our Senate meetings and whatever sessions we have, how do we ensure that ICT becomes part and parcel of the curriculum? We have a number of institutions that have actually said that you do this courses has ICT, but maybe it could only be having just basic. But as time goes by, it means that we have to see how do we ensure that ICT becomes a driver of how we deliver our academic content to the bigger population. And for me, that is key. And also it means that with time, the model of attending classes will change. Our professors and our lecturers have to look for, they have to go back to school and actually learn on how to deliver some of these contents. because it is true that with the COVID that came in, a number of institutions shut down, and it took them time for them to adopt and just think of how do we deliver e-learning, as one of us was saying. But some of the institutions have not embraced some of these platforms. And I think as AHERI, that is one area that we are actually focusing on, that how do we assist institutions to actually develop their e-learning spaces? Because it is missing. Most of African governments never thought it was a major thing, but with COVID, it is real that now it has to be done. So I think that is a key thing that we've discussed today. Let me wind up with the space, what we've discussed this afternoon about the funding and the grants. It is clear that most of this, let me bring the aspect of impact investors. It is true that there could be funding gaps as we explore some of these options. But I also want to remind us that there are quite a number of impact investors who are so interested in investing in very, very good ideas that would transform, for example, the education sector or the higher education sector. So I think it's all about us demonstrating that we have a good idea. For example, at AHERI, we've demonstrated that we can deploy digital villages to a bigger magnitude. So that means that we are able to put facts on the table and numbers on the table. And somebody might be able to invest in our model as a way of enhancing digital literacy. And so I think for us is what our take-home note today is, could we have more of this trial, these concepts going through the trial phases so that we learn from them, so that we develop keynotes, then we are able to attract the kind of funding that we're talking about. Because really funding now, a lot post-COVID funding, the nature of funding some of this development, whatever, will change, because now even the donor landscape is changing. And so a number of things will change. And maybe if UNICEF is willing to invest in this model, they look at what is the impact of the model that we want to roll out. So, but COVID has proven that actually we cannot live in the same spaces without ICT tools. We must ensure that we have connectivity in Africa. We must ensure that we have all this infrastructure in place. And so I think the funding is, let's come up with those ideas. As a community, we can champion it. We can knock a few doors here and there. AHERI is able to implement 1 or 2. We already done 1 or 2. And we are able to actually roll it in a big scale. For us, we have learned at AHERI that this is doable. And it is true that we're able to showcase it. We can help a number of institutions to showcase that it is possible. But I think moving forward is that there is, and we follow the ideas that we have. So I think, Barak, this far, let me wind up, make it sweet. Let me wind up as at that. And thank you everyone for your time, precious time. I know we all have our issues here and there, but thank you that you've created time to be in this conference. And we're looking forward that this community becomes greater and greater over time. I think it's a bigger journey for us, because I think in the first conference, we never had these numbers, we never had this kind of engagements. But I think COVID has also taught us that virtual conferences can work, and virtual conferences will also give us the right network of people that would also work with us over a period of time. Thank you so much and have a great day within our time zones.
Thank you, Gordon. And thank you everyone for making this wonderful day 1. We have interesting sessions that are coming up tomorrow, which will be day 2 of our conference. And I invite you to look at the program, which will be shared at the end of this session. Tomorrow's session starts at 9 a.m. That is East African time. We will also post the timing in UTC. And we start with Sally and Lala from Excel, Excel, a company in South Africa, who will be looking at funding and governance landscape post-COVID-19. We will also have a presentation from Matogoro Jabera, who has just spoken on infrastructure development and access. He's doing some research in that area, and we shall get to learn some interesting perspectives from what he's been able to learn. After that, we'll have a panel discussion that will look at funding and business continuity. Funding is a key issue that has been raised this afternoon, legislation and governance, as well as accreditation of online teaching. Our moderator for the day will be Dr. Collins Otieno Odoyo from the Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology, the Department of Information Technology. Our panelists again will include Sally, who will be the presenter, Dr. Eric Tambo from the United Nations University in Bonn, Germany, and Magdalene Oduor from the Institute of Advanced Technology. In the afternoon, we'll have our first presentation from Alan Aina from the West and Central African Research and Education Network, WACREN, and he will be talking about infrastructure development and access from a practical perspective. We will also have a presentation from Dr. Richard Omolo from the Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University of Science and Technology on the same subject. There will be a panel discussion that will focus on digital literacy with specific reference to capacity building and then infrastructure development and access. Our panelists will be Sheun Ojedeji, who is also a Mozilla Foundation fellow from the University of Ekiti, Dr. Eric Tambo, Andrew Gakiria from Microsoft Academic Education Partner, Maktogoro and Magdalene Oduor. And finally, we will have a closing session moderated by Dr. Collins Odoyo once again, and we'll have a summary of the key issues raised in the discussion given by Dr. Angira Charles, then Dr. Justus Massa, and finally Dr. Chikas Danfulani. And the closing remarks will then follow, and they'll be given by our conference convener and institute director, Mr. Robert Owino. So that's what we are looking up to tomorrow. For now, I invite you to turn on your cameras so that we can have the group photo, and then we shall